In a moment, we'll take you live to Hope, Arkansas. But first, a look at some background information on the nation's 42nd president.
He was a member of Boys Nation when, in July of 1963, he visited the White House and President Kennedy. The trip solidified an already burgeoning interest in politics. Classmates would later remember that children would gather around Bill Clinton. A teacher once predicted that his mouth was either going to get him into the governor's mansion or into trouble. A high school contemporary recalled that Clinton was always running for something, and his law school friends were impressed by his good grades, despite an impression that he didn't study. He was born in Hope, Arkansas on August 19, 1946, and named William Jefferson Blythe III, after his father, who died in a car accident shortly before his birth. His mother, Virginia, studied nursing in New Orleans from 1947 until 1950. Billy, as he was called, stayed behind in Hope with his grandparents, Edith and Eldridge Cassidy. He became acquainted with his first stepfather at his grandfather's grocery store in Hope. Roger Clinton owned a Buick dealership in town and visited the store often, occasionally to supply Billy's grandfather, Pawpaw, with bootleg whiskey. Roger Clinton's nickname was Dude because he was thought of as handsome, engaging, and well-dressed. When Virginia returned to Hope from school, they married. 2 years later, in 1953, the three relocated to Hot Springs, Arkansas. Although his stepfather never adopted him, Billy Blythe began to call himself Billy Clinton by the first grade. Life at home became increasingly more difficult as he became aware of his stepfather's alcoholism, and he often felt responsible for defending his mother against his stepfather's verbal and physical attacks. Despite conflicts with his stepfather, he legally changed his surname at the age of 16 as a sign of solidarity for his half-brother, Roger. The turmoil of his home life did not affect his education. He graduated fourth in his high school class of 323 students, where he was a member of the National Honor Society, junior class president, and a band major. In 1964, he applied and was accepted to his only college choice, Georgetown University. During his junior year, he served on the staff of his mentor, Arkansas Senator J. William Fulbright. He earned a degree in international affairs from Georgetown in 1968, and the following October set off for Oxford University, where for 2 years he was a Rhodes Scholar. In 1970, he began his first year at Yale University Law School and met Hillary Rodham. After exchanging a series of furtive glances in the library, Rodham approached him and said, "Look, if you're going to keep staring at me, and I'm going to keep staring back, we should at least introduce ourselves." For a moment, Clinton forgot his own name. After Yale, they both taught law at the University of Arkansas. They were married 5 years later on October 11, 1975. A year earlier, Clinton had suffered his first defeat in a race for the House of Representatives from the 3rd District of Arkansas. At his wedding reception, he announced that he would run for political office again. He held to his word and in 1976 was elected Arkansas's Attorney General. In 1978, he became the youngest Arkansas governor elected in 4 decades. He lost a re-election bid in 1980 and reportedly wept. Back on the campaign trail in 1983, he declared that he had, quote, made a young man's mistake. Voters re-elected him for 3 more consecutive terms from 1983 until he ran for president in 1992. His presidential campaign was plagued by rumors of marital infidelity, reported attempts to avoid the Vietnam draft, and a loss in the New Hampshire primary. His ability to sustain such blows led some in the press to nickname him the Comeback Kid. On November 3, 1992, Clinton received the largest number of popular votes of any Democratic candidate in history. He was sworn in to the first of 2 terms, January 20th, 1993. The economy, with low unemployment, inflation, and interest rates, has remained healthy through his administration. Independent counsel Kenneth Starr was named during his first term to investigate accusations that Clinton had unduly profited from a land deal known as Whitewater. During Clinton's second term, Starr also investigated charges that Clinton had encouraged White House intern Monica Lewinsky to lie under oath about their extramarital affair. Clinton later admitted to the affair with Lewinsky and on December 18, 1998, became the second president to be impeached by the House of Representatives since Andrew Johnson in 1868. He was acquitted by the United States Senate in February of 1999.
this administration led America into a new century, turned the economy around, proved that social problems could be solved, and that the country could pull together, that we basically prepared America for a whole new age, and that when we left, the country was much better off than when we came.
Welcome to Hope, Arkansas, the town William Jefferson Clinton called home from his birth in August 1946 until 1953, when his family moved to Hot Springs, Arkansas, 80 miles to the northeast. When he lived here, President Clinton made friends with 3 boys who would serve him more than 40 years later in the White House. Chief of Staff Mac McLarty, White House counsel Vince Foster, who lived right next door, and aide David Watkins. And the current governor of Arkansas, Mike Huckabee, also hails from this small town of 10,000 people. We're going inside this little home. You're going to meet in the next 3 hours Gary Johnson, Georgia Sorensen, David Marinis, but first Becky Moore, who runs this institution. Where are we?
We are sitting in the living room of the president's birthplace home. And I welcome you to Hope, Arkansas.
And where are we in relationship to the Hope Depot that we just saw on the screen?
We are approximately 3 blocks west of the depot.
Town of
So
10,000?
roughly 10,000 people, yes.
And what did you do in this house here?
Well, this was, we call it the birthplace home because there's also a boyhood home in Hope, Arkansas. And so we lead tours every day, on Tuesday through Saturday, actually. We lead tours through this home. The president was not born in this home, so a lot of people are confused when we say birthplace. But shortly after his birth, he was brought back home to this house.
And he lived in this community for how long?
Until he was 7 years old.
In Washington, David Marinis is going to be our anchor for this program. Good morning, Mr. Marinis.
Good morning, Brian.
Mr. Marinis was supposed to be here with us in Hope, Arkansas, but planes didn't work well last night and went back from Atlanta to Washington so he could join us this morning from our Washington studios. Tell us the circumstances in 1992 that got Bill Clinton elected president.
Well, the circumstances, the first important circumstance was that he had the intuition or the insight to actually run for president in a year when a lot of other Democrats chose not to out of fear that that George Bush was too strong. It's interesting to note that he didn't even announce for president, however, until the equivalent of this past October in 1991. You know, when this race for 2,000 people have been running, it seems like forever already, and at this equivalent time, Bill Clinton would have just entered the race a month and a half ago. And there were at least seven candidates for the Democratic side. But very early on, Clinton sort of connected with the party apparatus, the elite, who thought that he had more of a message than any of the other candidates. And it essentially was one message that he did carry through from then until now, which was about the changing economy, bringing America into the post-industrial information age, and trying to come to grips with that change. And that helped him throughout that period. It must also be said that many of the problems that have beset him throughout his presidency were also evident in a nascent stage, even as he was announcing. Washington was abuzz with rumors about his problems with women.
And what role do you think Hope and Hot Springs and Little Rock played in his eventual election?
Well, Hope was the perfect metaphor for Bill Clinton's optimism. He only lived there for 6 years, and in many ways, many parts of his personality are really more represented by Hot Springs, which is an utterly different place, much more dichotomous, with the Baptist churches on one side of the street and the illegal gambling parlors on the other. But of course, it doesn't have the poetry of the name Hope. And even when Bill Clinton was an adolescent in Hot Springs, he always longed to go back to Hope. which was a more innocent place for him and away from the turmoil of his stepfather. And he would actually take a Trailways bus from Hot Springs back to Hope, which was sort of the early rendition of the buoyant bus rides that he took in that 1992 campaign. There was always something on a bus that sort of liberated Bill Clinton. Hope also represents, in Bill Clinton's life, sort of the way he was formed by two women and really no father figure. His real father, William Jefferson Blythe, was killed in a car accident 3 months before he was born. Blythe was a traveling salesman who had just gotten out of the Army and was moving the family up to Chicago. He'd taken a job up there. His wife was pregnant. He was driving back to pick her up, and somewhere outside of Sykeston, Ohio, actually, his car turned over and he was found drowned in an incredibly small pool of water. And Bill Clinton was born 3 months later.
I take it from the birth and death dates on the cemetery that this man was only 28 years old when he died.
He was. He'd lived a full life in 28 years. He'd even before he met Bill Clinton's mother, Virginia Cassidy, he'd been married at least 3 times before that. He was born in a farm in North Texas, north of Sherman, Texas. Was an incredibly, by all accounts, engaging, friendly man who, was known for stopping at the side of the road to help people change their tires or even moving pianos for people. He had a charismatic personality. He also had big hands. Two of the things that you know about his son, Bill Clinton, were there with Bill Blythe.
We'll have the phone lines on the screen. You can begin dialing now and get involved in this early in this program. It's a 3-hour program from Hope, Arkansas. Becky Moore, if you're coming here from Little Rock, it's 112 miles from the airport. You come down I-30, and we've got some videos showing what it looks like to drive here. How long have you lived in this community?
I've lived here all my life.
What's it like?
It's a wonderful community, a great place to raise children. It has seen many changes through the years. I'm 45 years old, so I've seen it grow considerably in my years. But it still has that, even though we're growing by leaps and bounds now, we still keep that same great feeling where people do want to help each other, just as Mr. Marinus was talking about. If you need help, you can call anybody any given time, day or night, and they're there for you. And you see that. What's
the impact of this being the president's birthplace had on the community?
Well, we have seen approximately 10 to 15,000 people since we opened to the public in June of '97. And that means that many people have paid to go through this house. Probably triple that number to take in all the folks who've actually pulled off the road and visited us in the Clinton Center, those who have not toured the home. But as far as the economic benefit, most of those will buy some gas in Hope, Arkansas, or stop and eat in Hope, Arkansas. Maybe they shop here. Some spend the night. So it's definitely been a boost for this community.
How big a house is this?
It's roughly 1,700 square feet.
And how many rooms?
Well, we have just 3 rooms downstairs and 4 rooms upstairs. It is a typical American 4-square design, so they basically built the downstairs and mirrored it upstairs. The picture you're holding right there is, that's the way the house looked when the Clinton Birthplace Foundation bought the home in 1993. The president's mother is standing there with us in the white shirt and white pants. And Mr. Dick Kelly is standing there in the flowered shirt. That is his stepfather. He still resides in Hot Springs. But we were so fortunate to have Virginia with us in 1993 because she's the one who gave us the first inclination as to what we needed to do in order to decorate the place.
Bill Clinton talked to us about 2 weeks ago on videotape, and we've got the video of his comments where he talked about this house and what it meant to him. Why don't we take a look at that, and we'll come back and take a phone call.
Before we let you go, I want to ask you about the house in Hope. We're going to spend some time down there. What does that mean to you personally? What was it like growing up there?
Well, really, I have almost my first memories there because shortly after I was born, my mother, I guess I was about a year old, but I have obviously no memories of that first year. When I was about a year old, my mother went back to nursing school, and then became a nurse anesthetist because she was a widow and she wanted to be able to support me. So I was living with my grandparents till I was 4 in that old house. And I mean, an enormous number of memories are there. I still remember walking down the street to meet my grandmother when she came home from nursing in the daytime. I still remember going to my grandfather's store. I still remember playing out in the backyard with my friend Vince Foster. I still remember crawling on the old timbers of the railroad overpass it was half a block from the house. I mean, I just remember I remember a house across the street catching on fire and walking, you know, all the early memories of my life are centered in that house. I remember coming down the steps on Christmas morning, and I'm really so touched that the people down there have put that home back together. They've done a wonderful job, and you'll see it if you're going down there. You'll see they've really done a pretty good job. You think you're in about 1948 when you walk in there.
Becky Moore, that house is on the screen. How much did it cost you to refurbish this house?
Well, the original cost, and that takes in the cost I'm going to quote, takes in not only this place, but also the other structure and the ground to restore it all, was originally $1.5 million.
Canton, Ohio, you're our first caller for this program. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, good morning, Mr. Lamb.
Morning.
Yes, I'm a 22-year-old college student majoring in human and social service, and I just wanted to call and say a public thank you to President Clinton, because I would say as early as 1991, he really got me involved in wanting to serve the public in ways, whether in the public sector or in the private sector. And I think a lot of it has to do with I would consider my generation's John Kennedy, energizing young people to want to go out and want to serve, at least for myself. And I've had the honor to go and see him and the First Lady and the Vice President at rallies during the '96 election when I started college, and I was also using him as a central theme to win one of your national scholarships back in 1996.
Thanks for the call. Let me ask David Marinas to put in context, at 7 years into an 8-year presidency, his legacy, and whether or not what this caller is calling about will be one of his legacies.
Well, I think that it's part of his legacy, and actually, I think the overall legacy will be of great talent and promise, diminished by his own flaws. Certainly, he had some of the energy. He brought energy to the presidency, but he brought it for good and bad. And he did inspire some people. He also led to a lot of disillusionment with other people who believed in him and were disappointed either by his policies or his personal behavior. So I think it's a decidedly mixed bag that will remain so, even as some parts of his presidency that are detested today will probably diminish in time, and other parts that aren't even looked at very closely now will be enhanced.
If you've just joined us, David Marinas has a best-selling book. This is in your bookstores in paperback, First in His Class. What year did this come out originally, Mr. Marinas?
It came out in February of 1995, right when President Clinton was at the low point of his first term.
Next call, Swartz Creek, Michigan, on the conservative line. Good morning.
Morning. My question to David Marinas has to do with the influence of Harding College at Searcy, Arkansas, on the Clinton career.
Go on. You might have something here that I don't know about.
Well, Harding College is like, nationally, dating back to the 50s, was like our Hillsdale College.
Yes.
George Benson, the president of Harding College, went around collecting money from the very wealthy, promoting anti-communist, actually anti-Catholic view. Starr and John Whitehead, there's a picture of them together at Harding College as undergraduates.
What do you, Colin, let me ask you, why do you think that had an impact on this presidency?
Because George Benson did all of the track material, all of the videos, all of the material that was put out for the Birch Society was done through Harding College. it's a hotbed of Birchism.
Okay, thanks. David Marinus,
Well,
any impact at all?
I think that it's an interesting general point. I'm not totally aware of all the specifics of Harding College, but the general point that there have been people on the right who have been, if not obsessed with Bill Clinton, tracking his every move for many decades, and out to expose him in the ways that they see he's failed, or to exaggerate his failures, is very true. And it's been evident from the moment he entered politics that there were people on the right who detested him and who were focused on doing him in. And it's also very true that Bill Clinton is responsible for many of his own problems. They're equally true.
Blacksburg, Virginia, on the Liberal Line. Good morning.
Yes, I'm listening to C-SPAN radio. Is this Brian?
Yes, it is.
Okay, I appreciate the show very much, Brian. I mean, all 40 weeks have been excellent. My favorite's been the first 7, and please keep up the Great American Think-Off from New York Mills, Minnesota. Let me just do a couple statements and a question. If I had $1 for every question Brian Lamb has ever asked, I'd be a millionaire. If I had $1 for every lie Bill Clinton's ever told, I'd be a billionaire. I'm wondering if the guests could comment on the following. My opinion is if Bill Clinton dropped into hell today, I would not care, but I want to ask him this. If Bill could set the clock back 25, 30 years, would he do differently his anti-war protesting overseas and do a different game plan regarding the Vietnam War?
Thanks, Blacksburg. And I want to ask Becky more about this caller, because he was calling the Liberal Line, which I suspect he's not. Do you feel this controversy that you hear in people's voices here in Hope?
Pretty much, we have, I would say it's about 50-50 when they talk to me and express their views about this president. We hear a lot of what the caller was talking about. Do people come visit and look at the house and don't like him? Oh, definitely. We get that often. And it used to startle me when we began this, and they would actually come in and ask me specific questions, and some I probably shouldn't say, but it always amazed me that they would actually pull off the side of the road and pay to come through the house in order to cut this president down, and they would so freely do it.
Let me go to Oak Ridge, Tennessee on the Liberal Line this time. Go ahead, Oak Ridge, you're on the air. Hello, Oak Ridge. Oak Ridge, Tennessee. Could somebody please punch up the Liberal Line there? We'd like to call Oak Ridge, Tennessee. Are you there?
Yes.
You're on the air.
Yes, Brian. Good morning, Brian. Good morning, Brian and David.
Good morning.
First off, I just want to say this. I'm 65. I've been a Christian all my life, and I've watched, I'm really political, and I watch things very carefully. I've come to the conclusion that a lesser man than Bill Clinton could not have withstood all the slings and arrows thrown at him. It's just amazing, and I know that the Lord has been with him. There's no other explanation, and I admire him so much. And I think the Republicans, Christians as they profess to be, will really be the ones to have to answer for killing the spirit of this country, the office of the president, and our children. I just wanted to express my admiration and love for this man.
Thanks, caller. David Marinus?
It's amazing, Brian, the level of vitriol and support for this president is so emotional in all levels. When she says that a lesser man could not have survived all this, a larger man wouldn't have gotten into the trouble that Bill Clinton got into. But she's right also that a lesser man wouldn't have survived it. That is Bill Clinton, in the sense that he has probably the most amazing survival skills and fortitude and strength and perseverance of any person I've encountered. It was one of the reasons that the public stayed with him throughout all of his problems, was that they knew that he would probably find a way to survive. So it fed on itself. He got up every day still wanting to be president, even throughout that all. I'll never forget the night he gave that first State of the Union address a few days after the scandal broke. And I can guarantee that every other politician sitting in the House of Representatives that night, looking up at Bill Clinton, President Clinton, was thinking, could I be doing this if I were in his situation? And very few of them could have.
Becky Moore, go back to this house. We have a camera in the kitchen area and the dining room. Who actually lived in this house and for how long?
The president's maternal grandparents, Eldridge and Edith Cassidy, and they lived here, and they bought the home in 1938, and they lived here through 1956 before moving on to Hot Springs. He also lived here with his mother, as he mentioned that earlier.
Now, the kitchen and what we see here and what we're sitting in, are this exact kind of furniture was here when they lived here?
Yes, because of his mother's help, we were able to replicate the house as closely as possible, and we're looking at the kitchen right now, and that's a very important area to the president. You will see the high chair, which was donated by his third cousin, and in Virginia's book, he laughed and said he always had a weight problem because he was never allowed to leave the table before finishing every bit of food on his plate. So,
is that the actual high chair?
No, that belonged to his third cousin, and they did donate that to the birthplace. But Edith Cassidy loved to read, and she wanted to instill the love of reading into her grandson. So at the early age of 2, she would place him in the high chair as she began baking the daily bread, and she would bring Fun with Dick and Jane from his nursery upstairs to the kitchen. You will see the playing cards on the curtains. There is a picture, another picture of him when he won the Beautiful Baby contest. And we are back to the playing cards.
Why playing cards?
And the playing cards were placed on the kitchen curtain so she could teach him how to count. So he learned to recognize his numbers by looking at the playing cards.
San Diego, you're next. Go ahead, please. You're on the air.
Good morning. My question is concerning Bill Clinton's policy on gays in the military. Last week he came out and said he was opposed to his own policy. And I just noticed in the paper this morning that McCain and Forbes come out and they said they are in favor of his policy, and it's just kind of schizophrenic. And this is something goes way back in the campaign in '92. He was opposed to George Bush's policy on Haiti, but as soon as he took office, he continued that policy exactly. It kind of Humpty Dumpty world we live in with Bill Clinton.
David Marinas, your reaction?
Well, his policy on gays in the military has been confused from the beginning. In 1992, I was traveling with him when he held a somewhat historic rally, a fundraising event in Los Angeles, held by the gay community. And that night, he was very emotional in promising that he would end all forms of discrimination against gays, including in the military. And then very quickly after he took office, he backed away from that promise under threats from a few congressional leaders, did not want to have his presidency damaged so early. In fact, it was, in hindsight, or even at the time, it was a grave mistake on his part. He could have changed it through an executive order and probably gained more respect by sticking to his beliefs in something that even though there's a lot of hostility to it, is fairly easily explained on a moral level. Instead, he backed away, and it's been confusion ever since.
We have some videotape, Mr. Marinas, you might remember from February of 1992. It was during the New Hampshire primary, and the draft was a controversial thing. And this is James Carville, and we're going to run it, I don't know, it's about a minute and a half. But while you're watching it, there's a young man in the picture by the name of George Stephanopoulos, who at that time was on the campaign trail. Let's run this and get your reaction to what you see.
Why did the Pentagon, in your opinion, release the letter? If you
have to ask it again. I think that it is. Why do you think that? Well, let's try a case of rocket science. Here's an article in the Wall Street Journal on Friday, and here's a story that looks like it might be going away. and somebody says, aha, look, we have something that can kick this story an extra day. Because if Clinton is talking about the draft, he's not talking about the fact that we've had the lowest GNP growth under this administration, any administration in the history of this country. He is not talking about the fact that income equity in this country has gone from 8th to 22nd. He is not talking about the fact that George Bush had 4 different positions on a civil rights bill in 2 months. He is not talking about the fact that taxes have gone up for the middle class while services have gone down. This seems to be a very appealing thing to have him be talking about the draft and something that happened 23 years ago. So what we'll do is we will leak this to the press, and we will get the microphone in Bill Clinton's face talking about something that is not particularly advantageous to him and something that the voters care very little about, and we will block him out from talking about things that got him to 37% and made him the leading candidate. You understand? That's the way a political strategist thinks, okay? And they don't, it doesn't matter to them if the letter is inculpatory or exculpatory, folks. They are trying to kick the story, you see? And that's what's going on here. And if nobody can see that, I can't explain it to you.
What do you see in that clip, Mr. Marinus?
Well, Carville certainly knows how a political consultant thinks, as he said. Who knows whether he would have done the same thing on the other side. George certainly looks a lot younger there, and his haircut's different. Aside
There's
from
Paul
that...
Paul Begala on the screen right behind him there with a beard.
Oh, my gosh, yes. No, yeah. Aside from that, the actual, he's talking about, for those who don't know, the letter that Bill Clinton wrote from Oxford when he was 23 years old to the head of the ROTC in Fayetteville, Arkansas, where he had applied and gained admittance into the ROTC and then backed away from it and went back to Oxford once he realized he wasn't going to be drafted. And the letter has a few phrases that have resonated through the years, including he was trying to maintain his political viability throughout this process of maneuvering his way through the draft, and also thanking the Colonel for saving him from the draft. In fact, Carville's right that letter, sort of pushed the story further. But what he didn't say, and which history showed, was that letter actually helped Bill Clinton. Most people didn't read it or study it very thoroughly, but what they saw was a young man who was going through many of the same agonies that hundreds of thousands of other young men in that situation who were opposed to a war, did not want to fight in it, and were struggling to figure out a way to get out of it.
We have a call from Mountain Home, Arkansas.
Yes, I'd like to make a comment on the... A little while ago, there was a gentleman called from Virginia. I'd just like to point out once again that the Voice State program in the different states of the United States is a tremendous place to elevate your own education in what's going on in the world and in political systems. I'd like to say about Vietnam, I was a force reconnaissance Marine, and we shouldn't have been in Vietnam. We all know that. We believe that there's a big conspiracy on that deal, too. Hate to keep pushing on this. Just like the Boy Scouts here, I'd like to say there again, citizenship in the home and citizenship in the nation, citizenship in the community, all these merit badges and all these things that the kids can learn so that they can be more prepared. Bill Clinton is the best president that we've ever had. We lost a year of financial gain because of the stupid Republicans, and I used to be a stupid Republican. We just like to say, come on, you guys. We got the best president we've ever had. We're in the best financial condition we've ever been in. He saved us. We asked somebody to save us from the bottom falling out of our economics. Nobody could find a job. There wasn't any money. And all of a sudden, everything's working. We're going to be glad to see Al Gore for president for 8 years and then Hillary. But all of this is just going to happen. You guys badmouth James Carville. But, Stephanopoulos is a guy that kind of shoved it to the president and jumped ship there. You're not kidding anybody. We all know. We're the silent majority. We'd just like to see a little bit of honesty out here. And we really appreciate your one biography, and we'd like to see another one. And just keep up the good work. Silent majority is still out here, and we still love all of you. Bye-bye.
Becky Moore, when you hear this kind of a voice coming in, how does that divide up here in Hope, Arkansas today? I mean, what do the people here locally think of this man after 7 years in the presidency?
Well, like I said earlier, we will get pros and cons.
I'm talking about local. I'm not talking about your visitors. I'm talking about people who live here.
That's exactly what I'm talking about. We will have some local people who feel just as a caller did earlier and think that he's the worst president they've ever seen. We also have a large number in Hope, Arkansas who feels, as this man from Mountain Home does, that that he's the most intelligent and the best president ever. And so you will see a vast difference right here in Hope from one range to the other.
Waterford, Michigan on the conservative line. Good morning.
Good morning, Brian. You know, Bill Clinton is the most ingenuous person I've ever seen in my life. Everything about his presidency is about Bill Clinton. It's not about the country. And as far as the gentleman calling earlier, hey, Bill Clinton vetoed the welfare bill how many times before he jumped on board? If it wasn't for the Republicans, this country wouldn't be where it was at today, or where it is at, excuse me. He is so ingenuous. And here's some pure honesty. Here are the facts. Bill Clinton is a confessed liar. He's a confessed adulterer. He's been accused of rape, which he didn't deny when asked about it. He didn't deny it. That is the kind of man he is. Bill Clinton is all for Bill Clinton. He cares nothing about the country.
David Marinus, what's your reaction?
Well, there in two calls you have the range of feelings about Bill Clinton. You know, whether he cares nothing about the country, you know, I think that every politician is a narcissist to some degree. Bill Clinton probably is, in many respects, an exaggeration of the average politician, and that's one of those ways. To say that he cares nothing about the country is looking at the world in black and white when it has shades of gray in it. Even Bill Clinton has shades of gray, and he does care some about the country. He certainly, throughout his career, has made decisions where the choice was between furthering his career and doing something that he truly believed in. And in most cases, he chose the route that furthered his career. So he hasn't taken a series of strong, controversial, principled stands over his career, but he has survived and advanced some of what he believed in through his sort of the way he does things.
David Maris, quick, if you could, because we got a caller waiting. How would you assess what happened to his cabinet officers over his 7 years?
Well, it's been bleak. You know, his cabinet officers and a lot of the friends that he brought from Arkansas. You know, there's a joke now about Clinton and Al Gore, which is they go through a car wash together with the top down in a convertible, and only Al Gore gets wet. That joke applies to a lot of the cabinet officers that he's brought with him, and other people too who have gotten in trouble and not survived, while Clinton keeps going.
But on the other side of that, people like Donna Shalala and Janet Reno.
Oh, sure. I didn't mean to say that all of them have suffered like that, and he has had some who have been long-standing. Usually the ones that are a little bit removed from the center of things. And Janet Reno has survived largely because Bill Clinton could not remove her. I think he felt like it a few times, but she stayed in there throughout that whole controversial period.
We're in Hope, Arkansas, which is just a couple of hours south. I guess actually I took I-30 west, so it's a little bit southwest of Little Rock. And we are in the Hervey Street home where Bill Clinton lived in his earliest years in this town with his grandparents. And we go to Shreveport, Louisiana next on the Liberal Line. Good morning.
Oh, thank you. I wanted to say that I was so energized in the 1992 campaign. I had served as an activist in the Republican Party in Louisiana in the 60s and 70s. Had dropped out, and not until the voice of Bill Clinton and his policies came forth did I become energized, and will continue to be so. And I do know of a case in Shreveport in the campaign headquarters where a young 14-year-old who could not even drive had to be driven to the headquarters to work. he continued, he was very touched by the personality of Bill Clinton, and he wanted to go into public service. And at the present time, he is in Harvard, and I think he's a junior or senior, and I think his family here are very into medicine and the arts. And I just have seen this time and again, and I'm very nervous, forgive me. But we both, a 14-year-old and I'm 66, we're very energized. We understand what his policies are. He is able to articulate these policies. He believes in his policies, and we, a 14-year-old and myself, saw something, and maybe I'm sure others did too, and I just wanted to say this, and that I think that the country needed a person like Bill Clinton at the time. And
all right, thanks, caller. Now, Becky Moore, we're in the living room here in this home on Hervey Street. What have the local citizens done besides this to further his name in this birthplace area?
Well, they have also opened the depot downtown, and we have quite a few items there, and they also have a video theater in that depot, and it runs daily, runs A Man from Hope. And then
I want to stop you to show our audience where the
Okay.
depot is, off to the left of the train tracks, I think. Or are those train tracks on the right? I can't tell there.
They're at the back of the depot, so they're going to be to the left of that picture there.
If we pull back from that, I believe we can show where the house is in relationship to that. How many times a day does that train come by there? We haven't had one yet.
About 45 times a day, and I'm surprised that we have not heard one.
You didn't stop the trains for us today, did you?
Wouldn't that be nice?
And this street...
That's Division Street that runs directly in front of the Clinton Center.
And off to the right is his house, but off to the left there we see Vincent Foster's house.
Right behind the birthplace.
We're going to show that later on when we go upstairs, and Becky Moore takes us on a further tour as we go to Olathe, Kansas on the conservative line. Go ahead, please.
Morning, Brian.
Morning.
I'm rather amazed at the people in this country that have a loyalty to a president that in any other situation, if he was president of a university, if he was in business anywhere, would obviously been expelled from his position and we'd never heard of him. And I believe in loyalty. I'm from KU Jayhawk country and Kansas City Chief country. When it comes to my politics, I have the good sense to evaluate things. And one of the things that I find terribly wrong with what's gone on was that no one person in the House or the Senate voted to impeach Bill Clinton. The Democrats put party before principle. And if you look back at what happened to Nixon, Republicans came forward and said, this is wrong, you got to get out. People seem to be more concerned about their pocketbooks than they do about their politics. And there's no possible way for this country to grow and sustain and be what we have been if that's all we're going to look at is the money. And the Democrats in this country, if I was a Democrat, I would be ashamed to say it. And
all right, thanks. David Marinas, your reaction?
Well, the central question, aside from the rhetoric there, is would Bill Clinton have survived that impeachment vote, or even in the public opinion polls, if the economy had gone south during that period, if it had not been doing so well? And that's a question that we really can't answer. But I think that there's been some interesting polls this week that have shown that the number of people who support the concept of Clinton being impeached has gone up. His favorability has gone down in that year since the time of the impeachment. But I think it's largely a reflection of the fact that at that time, people didn't think the punishment fit the crime exactly, and they didn't want to go through the trauma of another removal of a president, and that's why he wasn't removed, for those two reasons. And that won't change.
Becky Moore, when did Virginia Kelly die?
She died in 1994.
And where is she buried?
And right outside of Hope at Rose Hill Cemetery, just a couple of miles outside of Hope.
And who's buried there with her, do you know?
Her parents and also the president's birth father, William Jefferson Blythe II.
There you see it on the screen.
And there's the grave site.
Clinton Kelly Blythe grave site. David Marinas, you say that he started to call himself Billy Blythe when he was, early in his life, and 6 or 7 years old, and Becky Moore says it wasn't until he was 15 he changed his name.
No, that's true. He started calling himself Billy Clinton, Brian, not Billy.
I'm sorry, that's right.
Not Billy Blythe. He was born Billy Blythe. When he started going to school, it was a question of why do you have a different name than your mother, and you know, in that era, it wasn't as common, and certainly not in a small town in the South. So he wanted to have the same name as the rest of his family. So he started calling himself Billy Clinton, the same name as his little brother and mother. And it wasn't until he was 15 that he legally changed his name to Clinton. And there are two fascinating aspects to that name change that I've never been able to totally figure out. One is that his stepfather, Roger Clinton, never adopted him, ever. And the second is that Bill changed his name precisely during a 3-month period when his mother was divorced from Roger Clinton. She'd married him and had a horrible time, you know, living with him because he was an abusive alcoholic. In the depositions of their divorce, you'll see her telling stories of him taking off her high-heel shoes and beating her with it, humiliating her in public several times. Young Bill Clinton, the 14 and 15-year-old, trying to intervene, him threatening to keep beating on Billy if he did. And yet, finally, his mother saved up enough money, moved from their house on Park Avenue in Hot Springs to another side of town. And it was during those 3 months that Bill Clinton went to the courthouse and changed his name from Blythe to Clinton.
Vicki Moore, have they done anything in Hot Springs like you're doing here about preserving the homes?
Not yet. I believe it is in the plans, but you don't have anything open to the public right now in Hot Springs. May I respond to what Mr. Marinas was just talking about as far as his name change? While he was in Hope, of course, he went to kindergarten, first grade here in Hope, and he did continue with the Blythe name. And then when he was talking about the time period when he did change his name, if you think about it, Mr. Blythe had one son, and it was William Jefferson Blythe III. So maybe Mr. Clinton, in knowing this fact, maybe out of respect for that name, did not want to interfere with that and let him keep that name going. And then when he was 15 years old, and it was during a terrible period in his life, Roger, his only other sibling, his half-brother, began first grade and at that time. And of course, he had the Clinton name. And so he went to his mother, and in Virginia's book, he makes mention of that it was really not out of love for Mr. Clinton himself, but it was more out of love for his little brother that he chose to change his name.
Eldred, Pennsylvania. Go ahead, Eldred, Pennsylvania.
Thank you for C-SPAN. For David Maris, I have a couple of points. But do you think if Bill Clinton's father could have got him in the Texas Air Guard, he'd have this problem? And the other point, if you'd like to answer the first one, go ahead.
Well,
it's kind of ironic when you think about it.
Well, no, because Bill Clinton's uncle, Raymond Clinton, helped get him into the ROTC in Fayetteville, and that's sort of the equivalent of George Bush and the Air Guard in Texas. But Bill Clinton chose not to go that route, and then he got into sort of further turmoil only 23 years later when it all came out.
Second question?
See, the concept is the same. I was in the Korean War.
Yeah.
I could have got a scholarship. I played football in Pennsylvania. I could have got a deferment. And my father says, no, I don't think so. But on the other point, do you think America should put up with Congress investigating the personal life of anybody? Don't you think that should be left to Mike Isikoff and people who relish that stuff? I think you should have some right of privacy.
Mr. Marinas?
It's really disgusting when you think about it.
Well, it was right on the line of, you know, whether it was focused on his personal life because of his personal life or because of statements he made that might have broken the law. It was, you know, it revolted people at the same time that what he did revolted people. So I think it worked both ways there. But clearly, I mean, you know, it's not just other congressmen who were incredibly hypocritical about it, as we've discovered even more now about Newt Gingrich's life during that period. But, you know, everybody, the whole country. Whenever you get anywhere close to sex, everybody's hypocritical.
Newport Richey, Florida, next. Go ahead, please.
Good morning, Mr. Lamb. Good morning, Mr. Marinus.
Good morning.
Back in the period when the press was savagely attacking our great President Clinton and calling him a draft dodger, my son was a combat Marine sergeant in Vietnam laying in the mud. George Bush was dawdling away in Yale or Harvard. I believe he went to both with college deferments, such as most of the conservative spokesmen, Rush Limbaugh and Trent Lott, and with college deferments. Do you consider 4 and 5 college deferments any different than dodging the draft some other way?
Do I? No. I think there were 100 ways to dodge the draft, and they were all equal in terms of their ethics or morality or lack of ethics or morality. But I think that the war in Vietnam, I mean, my personal opinion is that it was a wrong war in the wrong place, and that people who were dodging the draft were doing it in part because they hated that war, and in part because they were afraid to die. People who went in and fought the war did it for various reasons too. They were bored, they were screwed up at home, a lot of different reasons that people don't talk about today. It's not like everybody went in was heroic and patriotic, and everybody who didn't go in was a coward. It was a lot more complicated than that, and I think that people, in their heart of hearts know that.
Okemos, Michigan, on the moderate line. Good morning.
Good morning. And first of all, thank you, Brian, for this presidential series. It's really terrific. I'm waiting for Time Magazine to smarten up and put you on the cover for all the contributions you and C-SPAN have made. At any rate, my question or comment is that I do a lot of traveling in my work around the world. I was in Tallinn, Estonia this summer, going in to buy a nesting doll for my daughter and my wife, and I was shocked to see the variety that were based on Mr. Clinton. These Russian dolls, you open them up, and inside these were all the various alleged girlfriends and so forth. And it really brought home to me something that I wasn't very much aware of, which was the common person abroad's perspective on our country based on their perception of the Clinton scandals, whatever they are. I wanted to ask Mr. Marinus what his perception is on the impact of these events among the average person outside the United States, not necessarily the leaders of the world. What's the impression of our country? I'll hang up and listen. Thank you.
Well, I haven't traveled around the world to talk to people about it, but my impression is that there are parts of the world that are people in various countries in the world where their whole concept of power and officials and sex in private lives is so different that they were befuddled that this could possibly be a scandal in the first place. Then the whole information age and the way that television has infused knowledge to every aspect of the world and turned every event and public figure into a celebrity or icon or to be stereotyped or ridiculed or revered, has made it so that obviously Bill Clinton in that story was interpreted in a lot of different levels, including those of sarcasm and ridicule around the world through those dolls and stories and jokes all over the world. And that's another aspect to it. But they exist simultaneously, that sort of ridicule of him and the jokes, and people thinking, well, that's not such a big deal in certain parts of the world.
Now, Becky Moore, you've got, didn't I see some nesting dolls out there in your store?
Not exactly those nesting dolls.
I know. What is that? Yeah.
It has the family, the first family.
Where'd you get those done?
Well, actually, we took over the inventory from a shop in town. It was called the Presidential Shop, and Elaine Johnson was the owner of that shop. So when she closed her shop, we received her inventory. So I'm not sure where she received those nesting dolls, but we don't have the others.
Can we see those when we go over to the center
yes,
later?
We just have one set, so I would have to put them out.
All right. Now, in this next room over here is what?
We have the dining room. We're looking in the dining room right now. You can see a Martha Washington sewing cabinet and a Singer sewing machine.
How much of this is original? Any of it?
We don't have any of the original items, I'm sorry to say, but because of, with Virginia's help and several of his relatives who still live here in town. We have closely replicated the home. And when the president visited on March the 12th, he validated our efforts because he said it looked just exactly as he remembered. We're looking at the sewing machine. The dining room, although it was a beautiful dining room, and you can see it's quite large as they pull back, they did have a Duncan Fife table, and you can see the playpen in the corner, and the ironing board is in the other side of the room. Virginia called it her workroom instead of a dining room because she said they did a lot of reading and working and studying in there, and they placed the playpen in the corner so before he was able to run outside and play, they could put him in the playpen and watch him as they took care of their daily chores.
Now, when you raised the $1.5 million, where did you get the money?
Private donations. We had a lot of several corporations who pledged so much per year over a number of years, and then just $5, $10, $15 as people came in the birthplace. We still operate on that. Just our month-to-month maintenance program is pulled in from the people when they come in and pay $5 or $4 for a tour.
Who's in town, the relatives? How many relatives of Bill Clinton?
He probably has anywhere from 10 to 12 relatives in close proximity to Hope, Arkansas. He has several second and third cousins who live here, and we see them on a daily basis, basically because they're in the community working. The nurse who delivered him just lives 15 minutes away in Washington, Arkansas. Her name is Wilma Booker. And the president was born by cesarean section, and Wilma was there. And we see her on a regular basis, too.
Becky Moore is the director of the Clinton Center, and she's going to be with us for the rest of the program, but she's going to move upstairs now as we continue to take calls. And you're going to meet Gary Johnson in a moment, who's down at the depot. Somerville, Georgia, on the conservative line. You're next.
Yeah, I wanted to tell you something about Clinton. I had about 40 conversations with him. I'm getting old and my memory's getting short, so I can't remember the exact number, but one legal technicality is everybody keeps missing. They're talking about Clinton's private life. When someone is elected president, they are on duty 24 hours a day. They can't go to the bathroom without being on duty. So the president has no private life, and his fooling with a woman or anything else was in public while he was on duty.
All right, sir, thank you. Let's go on to Baltimore, Maryland, on the Liberal line. Good morning. Hello, Baltimore.
Good morning, and thank you for C-SPAN, and especially this series about our American presidents. I wanted to react to a comment by a conservative caller a couple of calls ago who said he was amazed that the American people continue to support this administration and our president in particular. And I think amazed was his word. And I think because I've heard that term and terms like it from other conservatives who are angry that most of the American people continue to support our president, I think that shows that they just don't get it. And as long as they continue to be amazed and don't get it, they're not going to win the White House. And I think that what their anger is all about is not about any of the petty, angry, mean-spirited issues that they've brought out about the president. It's all about the fact that they've lost control of the White House for the last two presidential elections.
Thank you very much, Baltimore. And in a few moments, we're going to show you a little bit of video that we put together to reflect the different international crises that President Clinton has dealt with. Let me ask David Marinas before we introduce our audience to Gary Johnson and take a couple more calls. How has he done, in your opinion, on an international basis?
He's done better than his worst critics thought he would do, and in some instances, when he took an action, the predictions of calamity that many people made did not turn out. On the other hand, he hasn't. He's been much more sort of a hawk than I think some people expected, and perhaps his own history has pushed him in certain times, and perhaps events in the White House have pushed him in that direction more so than the situation's warranted.
Canton, North Carolina, on the conservative line. Good morning.
Morning. I'll have to agree with your author there that
Mr. Clinton is a hawk, but he's a hawk that stays in his own nest. And if I was in combat, which I was in '58 in Lebanon, I wouldn't want this man backing me up. A man that can't tell the truth about anything, holding hands with your Chinese, and I think he did sell the tickets. I know there was cameras removed from Los Alamos. I wouldn't want him in combat behind me.
Thanks, Canton. Let's go on to Ellenton, Florida, on the Liberal line. Good morning.
Hello, thank you for letting me speak a couple of things. Well, one thing is that I often wonder why, if President Clinton can always, the caveat can be always thrown in about his personal weaknesses, especially as far as sex is concerned, why it wouldn't be necessary for all the rest of the presidents, like Kennedy, Johnson, Roosevelt, Jefferson, at least those that I can name are just offhand, that had the same weaknesses, and who knows if they would have lied. Also, the fact that this man has been pursued not only by his opponents for every month, and not only himself but his family have been pursued by his opponents, but by just a plethora of hate talk show people, and he has never responded hardly at all to those people. He keeps his eye on the ball and keeps doing his job. And also, just one more thing, if I might. Your commentator there said something about his vacillation on the gay issue. Well, to me, President Clinton is like a fine mechanic that knows how to operate the political system. And if he knows instinctively if he goes after something for some ideological reason that will cause him not to succeed in other areas, he knows when to back off the smaller thing in order to gain a larger thing. Thank you.
Thanks, caller. Let me ask David Meredith, let me ask you about, we're doing this program right in the middle of the presidency, and one of the things we've learned over the years is that Republicans who hated Harry Truman now say good things about him, and Democrats who hated Ronald Reagan now say good things about him. I want to ask you about this president and whether or not you think there is a point where people's attitudes might change like they have on other presidents the farther you get away from their presidency.
Well, I think that's inevitable, Brian. It's even FDR, you would have gotten an enormous amount of vitriolic calls if you'd been doing it during his presidency, and now he's being considered as the figure of the century. I'm not comparing Bill Clinton with him, except that you would still find that to happen. How the changes will occur, I'm not quite sure of yet. As to the question about Bill Clinton and his personal sexual life and previous presidents, that's a valid point that is impossible to argue, but there's one thing to keep in mind, which is that each president has to be considered within the context of the culture of the time when they were president. It's true that some of those presidents might not have survived if the same information age media culture had focused on their sex lives. It's also possibly true that someone like Bill Clinton or George Bush would have owned slaves if they had been presidents back in the late 1700s, early 1800s. So everything changes based on the culture of that time and place. And Bill Clinton took over the presidency with a specific knowledge of what the culture was like, what his own weaknesses were, what the probabilities were, and he persisted with behavior that got him in trouble and endangered everything else about his presidency and what he was trying to accomplish.
If you've just joined us, this is the 41st of 41 programs we were going to do on the presidency of the United States. There were 42 presidencies. As you know by now, Grover Cleveland served 2 terms, but not consecutively. Therefore, the number is 42 presidencies and 41 men that were president. In Washington, David Maraniss is taking calls and talking about the presidency. He's been on a 2-month book tour for this book, which finds itself on the... This book is on the New York Times bestseller list for, what is it, 7 weeks, Mr. Maraniss?
Well, actually 11.
Oh, excuse me for miscounting. And he's in our Washington studio after he gallantly tried to get here last night through Atlanta. Travel's difficult. He hasn't had many hours sleep. I just want to divert just for a second and ask you, what is it like to be on a 2-month book tour?
Haven't you done it, Brian? Your whole life is a book tour.
But I doubt if I've done it like you.
Well, it was, in this case, it was exhausting but exhilarating because I enjoy talking about Vince Lombardi, and I've not only gotten to see the whole country, but a lot of former Green Bay Packer players who played for him around the country, and delve into aspects of American culture that I don't normally deal with in writing about President Clinton or Vice President Gore or many of the politicians in Washington. It is true that I've never forgotten what city I was in, but I realized that you forget what your hotel room number is because you remember it from the day before. So I've been, I have a tendency to be an absent-minded professor anyway, and I've certainly been wandering around enough hotels trying to remember what my room number is.
In a few minutes, Georgia Sorensen, who is a professor at University of Maryland and has written a book about leadership and the presidency, will join us for the last hour and a half of this program. Our cameras are outside today along Hervey Street, which is right off of I-30. Those of you who have never been here, 2 hours south of Little Rock, Arkansas. We're in Hope, Arkansas, the birthplace of President Bill Clinton. And there you can see the birthplace home that used to be owned by his grandparents on your screen. There's another home in town on 13th Street he lived in for a while, and Gary Johnson, who now owns that house, runs the visitor center at the depot. Mr. Johnson is in front of our camera down there. Good morning.
Good morning. Glad to be here.
How long have you lived in that 13th Street house?
I have lived there for about 5.5 years.
Why did you buy it?
Well, at the time, it was obviously for sale, and there was some interest from someone in Canada on buying it. And one of the main reasons that we were interested in it was to keep the home in local ownership. Plus, it kind of goes hand in hand with what I do here at the visitor center, so it was kind of a natural fit, I guess you could say.
One of the last times we were down here, we had a chance to visit that home, and I met your parents. But later on, we asked the President of the United States in the Oval Office back in, I believe, 1993, about this little home. And at the time that we were here first, it was on the market for $100,000. Then when we did the interview with him, it was on the market for $80,000. Do I dare ask you how much you paid for this home, Mr. Johnson?
Well, Brian, it wouldn't be the first time I've been asked, and I don't mind sharing. We ultimately wound up paying $50,000 for the house, which is probably twice what the little home is worth as just, as a home. So the political hype, I'm sure, is what drove the price double.
There it is on the screen right now. How much work have you done on refurbishing this home?
Well, actually, my job at the what we call the boyhood home of President Clinton is mostly taking care of the yard, the maintenance. Because when I purchased the home, there was a lady that had owned it recently that had already completely remodeled the inside of the home. So we try to keep it attractive and keep the grass and the flowers and just give the best image for hope that we can through that little house.
We'll come back to you in just a second. We want to take some calls as we go through this segment. Malta, New York, on the conservative line. Go ahead, please. Hello, Malta. You're on the air.
Hi. Thanks for taking my call. I'm a 10-year-old girl who is homeschooled, and part of my course this year was studying the president. I think what Mr. Clinton did was wrong when he lied to everyone. Why did he say that he wore his impeachment as a badge of honor? Isn't that something he should be ashamed of? Thank you.
Mr. Marinus?
You can get them at all ages, huh? This is amazing.
Let me ask Gary Johnson that, because he thinks a lot about this stuff. What was your reaction to the 10-year-old call?
Well, I think what we try to do mostly here is focus on the positive aspects of President Clinton. All of us know that there is a downside, but there are many positive things that young people, students, can look at and learn from. He's an incredibly strong person. with all of the problems that have beset him during his presidency, it's obvious that he's a winner in that regard. Also, I love to tell the school children that come to the visitor center that President Clinton is a prime example of someone coming from actually having very little, and in our country having the opportunity to reach the highest office in the land. So I understand the frustration of the caller. We hear a lot of pro and we hear a lot of con.
Gary Johnson, on the screen is some video of you talking to some kids, and there's a little cat running around there. We saw that earlier. The cat looks an awful lot like Socks the cat. Where'd you get that?
Well, my wife, Giovanna, if we didn't mention that cat, I might as well not come home in the evening. That little cat, about 6 weeks ago, just wandered up to our house. And it didn't take very long before we realized that this cat does an excellent job with the tourist. If there's someone that drives up to take a look or take a picture of the house, if they're out there just a couple of minutes, here comes that cat walking across the top of the fence row there, and will even jump right up on top of the historical marker out there. So, you know, that cat just goes perfectly with the house.
How long have you lived in Hope?
I have lived here all of my life. I was born and raised here, and I'm very proud of our community, and enjoy living here as a young adult as well.
And how did you get this depot started? And tell us how much did it cost you, and where did you get the money for it?
Well, then Governor Clinton, when he was running for president in '92, he came to Hope, and a lot of campaign photos were shot. And one in particular of him with what was basically a abandoned railroad station. Well, that photograph was used as the prime or the #1 photo for a story by Time magazine. And so when he was elected president later, we didn't have a visitor center. We had nowhere for people to go to pick up literature, to find out where the sites are in town. So the town said, you know, there is our visitor center. That's kind of a short version, but it took a lot of work, but now this is undoubtedly the most beautiful building in our community.
How much does it cost you a year to run it?
Well, we have a tourism tax here in Hope that was already in place approximately 20 years before President Clinton ever took office, and that money in the past was being used for primarily to promote our Watermelon Festival. But now most of that money is coming to the train station, and it's me, and I have one other helper that is on staff here. Everyone else is a volunteer.
St. Augustine, Florida, on the Moderate line. Go ahead, please.
Good morning, C-SPAN, and thank you very much. And to Mr. Maris, I enjoy your work.
Thank you.
I just turned this TV on about 15 minutes ago, so I'm not sure if this was brought up or not. But besides Clinton dodging a draft, he did a lot more than that. He said that he doesn't recall, his magic words, if he ever received his draft notice. Well, if that's correct, then he belongs in St. Augustine's Believe It or Not, because there isn't a single person in the United States who doesn't recall receiving their draft notice. That is a very, very big moment in your life. I'm retired from the military and served 4 years in Vietnam. And when people like Clinton go on foreign soil and denounce United States policies in Vietnam, that is devastating to the American troops, and it is a morale booster to the enemy.
Thanks, caller. You want to talk just a little bit about this, Mr. Martinez?
Well, he certainly did remember getting his draft notice. During the '92 campaign, he seemed to forget it temporarily until it became obvious that he did get a draft notice. And then he told his staff, oh, I just didn't bring it up, which infuriated privately many members of his staff. But in my biography, there are several letters of his and other people's talking about that draft notice and what a trauma it was for him, and how that set into motion the chain of events that eventually led him to avoiding the service altogether.
Washington, D.C. on the Liberal line. You're next.
Hi. I wanted to bring up 2 points that I've heard while I was listening to the program this morning. Number one was I was reading the paper last week, and I found that Clinton said that he was changing his stance on gays in the military because a young gay soldier was beaten to death in his bunk while he was asleep with a baseball bat. And Clinton said that obviously the don't ask, don't tell policy is not working if that kind of discrimination is still taking place. The second thing I wanted to mention was that there have been the 2 most popular presidents for each party were Franklin Delano Roosevelt for the Democrats and Ronald Reagan for the Republicans. Both of these people had major scandals during their presidency. Ronald Reagan was the Iran-Contra thing, which he picked up the nickname the Teflon president from that, if I recall correctly. And Franklin Delano Roosevelt was accused multiple times of trying to manipulate Congress to suit his own needs and the needs of his presidency. But if somebody could address both of those questions, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Mr. Marinus?
Well, I think that that President Clinton is nearing the end of his second term and saw the violence against gays in the military as an opportunity for him, almost a cover for him to change his position on it, if not his policy. But the correlation between a gay person being beat up in the military and the policy change is not direct. I mean, you know, that could happen no matter what the policy was. Even if you allowed gays in completely, they could still get beaten up, you know, by someone who was a bigot. So I think he you know, he believed from the beginning that there should be no discrimination against gays in the military, and he backed away from it for political reasons. An earlier caller had brought up that it was because of his ability to sort of gauge exactly what would work and what wouldn't work and how it would affect his future presidency. He certainly is very good at that, but nonetheless, even backing away from gays in the military, he took his presidency completely off course in those first 2 years, to the point where he lost Congress and lost his one single major initiative of his presidency, which was health care reform. So it certainly didn't help him in that regard.
Each one of our shows, through the 41 different episodes, we've talked to a teacher or a student at a school named after the president in which the program is about which the program is talking. Masako Christian is from Sherwood, Arkansas, where there is the William Jefferson Clinton Elementary School. Good morning.
Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to be involved in this aspect of the American President series.
Nice to have you with us. Tell us why this school was named William Jefferson Clinton and how long ago?
The school was named after President Clinton in 1994, and our school was named after President Clinton because of his strong dedication to and advocacy of education, which dates back to his years as governor of Arkansas. And the Pulaski County Special School District officials and others involved felt it was a befitting honor to Arkansas's favorite son to name the school after him.
Are you aware of any other school in Arkansas named after him?
No, I am not.
Has he been there?
Yes, he came in January of 1994 to a dedication ceremony, and that was a most memorable event for, as a matter of fact, it was January 1995. And he and Mrs. Clinton were present, and they spent a large portion of that day with students and teachers and administrators. And this was a time for our students to see and to talk to the President of the United States, which is something they may never have the opportunity to do again. So it was a very memorable event.
Gary Johnson's at the depot. Is there a school here in this town of Hope named after Bill Clinton?
And there he is. It's William Jefferson Clinton Primary School.
And how long has it had that name?
I think the school is approximately 3 years old. It started out just as Hope Primary, but they renamed it not too long ago.
Do you have kids, Gary Johnson?
No, I do not, but my wife teaches first grade at the school.
Go back to Masako Christian. When you hear the program like this where people are very strongly divided about Bill Clinton, what do the kids say about all this? Do they pay attention to any of the controversy we've been talking about?
Well, of course, they are very much aware of all of the controversy, but we definitely try to focus on the positive, and we definitely try to focus on how he has contributed to society in a positive way, and because he has made a lot of contributions, and so therefore we try to steer our children in the more positive aspect of his presidency rather than on the controversial issues of his presidency.
Where is Sherwood, Arkansas?
Well, it is a suburb area of North Little Rock, which is, a twin city of Little Rock in a sense, and so it is right outside of North Little Rock, Arkansas.
How many kids are there in school there?
We have almost 800 students at our school.
And where are you from originally?
I am from Little Rock.
Masako Christian, thank you very much for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
Our call next is from Springfield, Missouri on the conservative line. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I had several questions for Mr. Marinis, some things that I'd heard, and I was wondering if he could confirm or deny them. Is it true that Mr. Clinton's father died in a ditch during a rainstorm with a case of whiskey in the back seat? And I believe his mother was married 5 times, and I think I heard something about the third husband actually ran a whorehouse, and that Mr. Clinton used to hang out there as a young child, and, maybe that's where his opinion of women was developed. And I also was curious about the long-lost brother who came forward after he was elected, and what kind of a relationship does he have with him? Does he keep in contact? Did he help him get a job or anything?
Thanks. Mr. Marinis, okay. I can throw a couple more in there if you'd like.
The first question was his father found drowned in a ditch with a bottle of whiskey in the back seat. I went up there and got the police reports and all of the accounts of that accident. There's no report that I saw that mentioned whiskey in the back seat. It's possible. I mean, he did drink. It's possible that he was drinking. The car certainly went off course for no discernible reason. He was speeding home. He might have swerved into the ditch because it was late at night. I don't know where the whiskey in the backseat story came from. I've never seen any evidence of it.
How many times was Mrs. Clinton married?
Mrs. Clinton was married 5 times to 4 men. She married Roger Clinton twice. Her third husband, Jeff Dwyer, was a hairdresser who was certainly, he did not run a whorehouse that I know of, a house of prostitution. He certainly had some women who worked at such a house as his clients at the hairdressers.
What about was there another brother of his that turned up later on in his life?
Well, William Blythe was married several times and had at least one other son who did show up, after Bill Clinton was president, born in Austin, Texas. There's a lot of mystery surrounding all of that, surrounding Bill Blythe and his relationship with Virginia, and as an historian on that, I feel uncomfortable talking too much about it because the facts aren't clear.
Gordonville, Texas, on the Liberal line, you're next.
Yes, I'd like to address Reagan. He's done more treason against his country on that Iran-Contra, and all Bill Clinton done was personal. And I'd like somebody to comment on that.
Mr. Marinis?
Well, you can make a case against Ronald Reagan on Iran-Contra. It's certainly, he survived that. He became known as the Teflon president. Bill Clinton did for other reasons. There are things that presidents do that aren't illegal at all that can, affect people for the worse, millions of people around the world. So, you know, I always try to keep those aspects in perspective, that everything that's illegal is not necessarily the worst thing in the world, and everything that's legal is not necessarily good. You know, you can have a president who does everything by the book and yet does more harm to humankind than someone else. So
Gary Johnson, how much has this town changed in the last 7 years?
Well, having lived here all my life, prior to President Clinton's election, Hope was definitely in a tailspin. Our downtown had largely collapsed. People avoided it. Buildings were uncared for. The trees and the planters were busting out of the walls. And one of the very first things that happened in our town, especially connected to the train station, was to remove a fountain and a walking mall which had been built in the 70s. We had one-way traffic downtown, and frankly the trees were so large that you could not even see the train station. So all of that was taken out, was reversed, so that people could find our visitor center much more easily.
We're going to ask you to show us around there after we take this call from Sevierville, Tennessee. You're next. Go ahead, please.
Yes, thank you. My call is in regards to the 10-year-old student that was homeschooled. What bigger leader in this country do we have for all of the country than the president? No matter what religion, ethnic background, what bigger leader do we have? And so Mr. Johnson, when he replied to her question, does he want us to basically teach our children to sell their souls for a buck? It's okay that the president did all of these things with these other women, and it's okay for him to still be in office. But it's okay because he's bringing money into the country. My children are 7 and 9, and just what little they have heard through school and through us here at home and reading the newspaper to them, my children cannot stand to hear about President Clinton. And I understand where this 10-year-old is coming from. Are they so much brighter than us to understand what this man has done to our country? The grown-ups that let him still be in office, I mean, I don't understand this. Are we supposed to, what are we teaching our children?
Gary Johnson, any comment?
Well, Brian, my stand has always been, I do not defend the president on some of his personal behavior. What I try to do, and what I think we do here in his birthplace, is try and focus on some positive attributes of the man, because I think there are some. If anyone who has ever met President Clinton comes away with an overwhelming good impression. He's a decent person. He has a part of him that is not one that you know, that you might want to model your personal life after, and I understand that. But we have a job to do here in Hope. We have to present President Clinton to an interested world that comes and visit, and we choose to talk about the good.
Gary Johnson, show us a little bit around the depot there so we can see some of the photographs you've got.
I had chosen a few that I wanted to make mention of. The first one, this is a little photograph that actually the president's mother took. This is the president at about age 5 or 6, standing on the sidewalk out in front of our little home, or the Clinton boyhood home. And as you can see, he's wearing a little cowboy suit. And after the last 5, 6, 7 years, I get the feeling that most people in our community, this is how they remember the future president.
Where did you get the photographs? These are some that we haven't seen before.
This one here, actually, while the president's mother was still alive, she had loaned some personal pictures to a museum in Hot Springs, and we were able to get the Clinton's permission to have copies of these made for our museum.
Sounds like we're getting one of those 45 trains a day or whatever coming through here.
The very first one.
How often do you hear this train?
Well, if on a good day, when Union Pacific is really rolling, about every 10 or 15 minutes they come through.
And Becky Moore is upstairs here in this house, ready to show us some more on the... what bedroom are you in, Becky Moore?
I'm in the nursery. If you will look to my right, you will see that this room is surrounded with windows. So this was originally a sleeping porch, Brian, and they used it as such when the home was built in 1917. And then when the president was born in 46, they converted this small sleeping porch into a nursery. And we're looking at a bassinet. We also have the baby bed right beside me. And in the baby bed, we have some little boy dresses that were also donated by his third cousin, and the president and his third cousin are the same age. And he laughed about the little doll that's in the bed when he visited on March the 12th because he said it looked like him. So he thought that was rather cute to have that in the bed.
I understand if we look out that back window, there's a house that belonged to a family that the name is very familiar in America.
Vince Foster's yard backs up against the birthplace, and so we're looking now into the backyard of Vince Foster, and you can see a shot of the Foster home as well.
Did they, as children, play together?
Yes, sir, they did. They attended kindergarten and first grade and together, and they were dear friends. So many people are surprised because they assume that he did not meet Vince Foster until Foster took the role as a lawyer at Rose Law Firm in Little Rock, but they were childhood friends.
And Becky Moore is inside that window you just saw in the Hervey Street home in Hope as we go to Greenville, South Carolina on the Liberal Line. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for taking my call. I just want to say I lived in Europe for 3 years, and people over there absolutely cannot understand what all the fuss was about. They realize that people have sex lives and that people are human, politicians in particular, and that they make mistakes. What they look for in their politicians is that they make good political decisions and do good for their country, and I firmly believe that Clinton has done that, or tried to, with the health and education reforms he would like to bring out, which is not being allowed by Congress. And they also don't understand why religious leaders and preachers are excused from lying and sexual misconduct, and yet the President of the United States is held up to standards which no one can fulfill. You know, he's human, as we all are.
Thank you. Got the point. Let's go to Corpus Christi, Texas, on the conservative line. You're next.
Brian, this is Jamie in Corpus Christi. We've talked before. I really appreciate your show, and I really appreciate the way you're controlling the callers. Thank you. I'd like to know what relationship David Maraniss has with the administration now, and is he convinced that the president has done everything he could for this country, considering that he had a Republican Congress? Thank you.
David Maraniss.
My relationship with the president is non-existent. I've met him, I spent a lot of time with him in 1992. I've met him once since I wrote the book. It was for a few brief seconds, which I've recounted several times. And on the other hand, with the administration, most people around Clinton respected my book as honest, fair, and the truth. The president himself did not particularly like at least half of it at all, and would dispute anything that's critical of him, but that's not my concern. So, I have a decent relationship with people who respect my reporting and my pursuit of the truth.
Minneapolis, Minnesota, on the Liberal Line. You're next.
Hi. What an absolute honor to talk to both of you. And I, again, have a response to the 10-year-old little girl, which I question if she's a 10-year-old little girl, pardon me. I wanted to say, what are her parents teaching her? I mean, I am deeply offended by Republicans that use religion as a stepping stone and put themselves up all high and mighty and just rip this man apart. It really bothers me, and a 10-year-old girl should not be learning how to hate a president. So that's my thought on it, and I do agree he's been through hell, but I think all the best presidents have to go through hell. So
Thanks.
thank you very much.
Georgia Sorensen will join us in a few minutes, but Becky Moore is again upstairs showing us a little bit more of this little house on Hervey Street. What do you have?
We are now in the bedroom of Mr. and Miss Cassidy, the president's maternal grandparents. And if you will look to my left, we have their bed. This bedroom also has another bed. We have chenille bedspreads on all of the adult beds and friendship quilts. And we're looking at Lavetta Cassidy's name on this quilt. And you will see that the name is spelled C-A-S-S-A-D-Y, and now they spell it I-D-Y. And the reason for that, he had a distant relative who was in the service, and upon being discharged from the service, his name was misspelled on the discharge papers, and that was often the case. And so now they spell it with an I-D-Y. We have another bed in this room, as I mentioned, and the reason for the two beds, Mr. and Miss Cassidy slept in one, and when they had company, the company slept in the other bed. And so we will slowly go to Virginia's room in a minute, and you will see her large bedroom compared to this small one. We also have another friendship quilt on this bed, and there's another Cassidy name, a Margie Cassidy, on this quilt.
Let me ask David Maraniss, as we're switching around here, we got a lot of ground to cover in a very short time. How many Supreme Court appointments has Bill Clinton had?
Oh, that's the kind of... I'm having a George W. Bush moment here. How many appointments has he had? He's had 2 or 3.
Well,
Two.
it's on the
Breyer
screen
and
right
Ginsburg.
now.
Okay.
Yeah, we solved the problem.
Right,
and has that been, I mean, the real question for you is not the numbers so much as what impact has that had? Has he had the kind of appointments that a two-term president normally has?
Well, people are expecting the next president to have even more impact. It hasn't been enough to really change the dynamics of the Supreme Court, but there are enough Supreme Court members now up in age that the next president, particularly if it's a two-term president, will totally define the court.
Gary Johnson is down at the depot, and I don't know if you can find it right now, but I'd love to see that photograph, and it may be the only photograph of Bill Clinton and his father, Bill Blythe. Do you have that over there? Are you anywhere near you can show us that?
We have it here. It would take just a little moving around.
Why don't I take a call while you do that?
Okay.
And we'll go to San Jose, California, on the moderate line. Good morning.
Thank you very much. This is Masood Alavi from San Jose, California. President Clinton has been really good once the international crises have developed to address them. But I've tried to talk to him and Sandy Berger on addressing the nuclear crisis between India and Pakistan for the last 2 years, since 1997.
Caller, I'm going to interrupt and let you go because we have a 30-day policy, and you have called on every one of these shows, and I appreciate your interest. But we need to move on to one more call to Marietta, Georgia, and then we'll wrap it up here before we take a break. Go ahead, Marietta. You're on the air.
Yes, good morning, Brian. Let me state, first of all, I'm very proud to be a Democrat. And as far as I have the proper moral character to call on the proper line, and I really think President Clinton is probably the greatest president we've had in our lifetime. His speaking ability is just, on any subject, is just amazing. I mean, George W. or George W. Bush, the former president, they couldn't even read a bumper sticker without fumbling. As far as the 10-year-old girl, for her parents to put her up to that, I'm sure she doesn't even know what the word impeachment means. And I just want to say I support the president. I'm really enjoying the show. Thank you.
Thanks. And now, Gary Johnson, show us the photograph.
This is really one of only 3 pictures that I can think of the president's actual father. This was actually a photo postcard that one of his relatives here in Hope had, showing Bill Blythe approximately 1945, so the end of the war. He was a soldier in the Army, and but just really a couple of more pictures are all that I can think of. They weren't married, but just a few years, and so I'm sure that's one reason why the family, never had very many photos.
We're also only about 30 miles from the Texas border, down near Texarkana, where Ross Perot was born. If you come to your depot there, does it cost you anything to walk around it?
No, there's no charge whatsoever, and it's very easy to find. Really, Hope only has 2 exits off of I-30. You can take either one. And once you get to the end of the ramp and start your turn into town, all you need to do is follow the red, white, and blue visitor center signs. They'll bring you right to our doorstep. and we're right at the end of Main Street in downtown.
Gary Johnson, we'll be back to you after the break. And upstairs, Becky Moore, do you charge anything to come to the house here?
Yes, we do. We have the adult price is $5. Our senior citizen rate begins at age 55, and that's $4. And then 18 to 6 years of age is $3, and under 6 is free. But we also have a special rate for school children, and that's just $1 per child.
How many visitors are you getting a month?
During our busy season, Brian, usually June through September or the beginning of September, we will have roughly 400 per month. In the off season, about 200 to 250 per month.
And tell us about this room before we take our break.
Okay, this is the larger bedroom, and it was Virginia's bedroom. And again, you will see the chenille spread and the friendship quilts on the bed. We also placed a nurse's coat and a cap to represent her profession. This was not hers, but we just wanted to represent that. And Virginia told us 2 reasons why she had the larger room in the house. The first one being, she said she was an only child and she was used to getting everything she wanted, and she wanted the larger bedroom. The second one I tend to believe more than the first. She said her parents loved to entertain downstairs, and so they gave her the larger room so she could bring her friends upstairs into this room.
David Maraniss, last question for this segment to you. Are you surprised by anything our callers have been saying so far?
No, I'm really not. It's been the case for many years that most of the everything revolving around Clinton is framed in a totally ideological perspective of love him or hate him, and so this seems to be falling into that category with the callers as well.
David Maraniss in Washington. We're in Hope, Arkansas. We just have an hour and a half left of this series to go, and Georgia Sorensen, who is at the University of Maryland, will join us in just a moment. But first, during our break, here's a video clip of the 1992 debate in St. Louis between Bill Clinton and George Bush, and talking about patriotism.
Ross gave a good answer, but I've got to respond directly to Mr. Bush. You have questioned my patriotism. You even brought some right-wing congressmen into the White House to plot how to attack me for going to Russia in 1969, 1970, when over 50,000 other Americans did. Now, I honor your service in World War II. I honor Mr. Perot's service in uniform and the service of every man and woman who ever served, including Admiral Crowell, who was your chairman of the Joint Chiefs and who's supporting me. But when Joe McCarthy went around this country attacking people's patriotism, he was wrong. He was wrong. And a senator from Connecticut stood up to him named Prescott Bush. Your father was right to stand up to Joe McCarthy. You were wrong to attack my patriotism. I was opposed to the war, but I love my country. And we need a president who will bring this country together, not divide it. We've had enough division. I want to lead a unified country.
You can learn more about President Bill Clinton or any American president by visiting our website at cspan.org. From there, click on to American Presidents. You'll find background information on all 41 presidents, as well as directions to historic sites, and all of our past programs from C-SPAN's American Presidents Life Portrait Series. You can see C-SPAN's complete video record on President Bill Clinton this Friday night at 8 p.m. Eastern. It's part of our American Presidents series. Our American Presidents Life Portrait Series continues the last 2 weeks of 1999 with a look at each one of the 41 men who have been President of the United States. For each president, we visit a location significant to their life and talk to historians, biographers, and educators about each president's life story. That begins today at 1 p.m. Eastern.
This year on C-SPAN, 41 presidents in 41 weeks. Each week, C-SPAN presents a portrait of one president's life story, including visits to presidential sites, documentary-style vignettes, and conversations with historians and biographers. American Presidents Life Portraits, C-SPAN's 20th anniversary series.
In a moment, we'll take you live to Hope, Arkansas. But first, a look at some background information on the nation's 42nd president.
He was a member of Boys Nation when, in July of 1963, he visited the White House and President Kennedy. The trip solidified an already burgeoning interest in politics. classmates would later remember that children would gather around Bill Clinton. A teacher once predicted that his mouth was either going to get him into the governor's mansion or into trouble. A high school contemporary recalled that Clinton was always running for something, and his law school friends were impressed by his good grades, despite an impression that he didn't study. He was born in Hope, Arkansas on August 19, 1946, and named William Jefferson Blythe III, after his father, who died in a car accident shortly before his birth. His mother, Virginia, studied nursing in New Orleans from 1947 until 1950. Billy, as he was called, stayed behind in Hope with his grandparents, Edith and Eldridge Cassidy. He became acquainted with his first stepfather at his grandfather's grocery store in Hope. Roger Clinton owned a Buick dealership in town and visited the store often, occasionally to supply Billy's grandfather, Pawpaw, with bootleg whiskey. Roger Clinton's nickname was Dude because he was thought of as handsome, engaging, and well-dressed. When Virginia returned to Hope from school, they married. 2 years later, in 1953, the three relocated to Hot Springs, Arkansas. Although his stepfather never adopted him, Billy Blythe began to call himself Billy Clinton by the first grade. Life at home became increasingly more difficult as he became aware of his stepfather's alcoholism, and he often felt responsible for defending his mother against his stepfather's verbal and physical attacks. Despite conflicts with his stepfather, he legally changed his surname at the age of 16 as a sign of solidarity for his half-brother, Roger. The turmoil of his home life did not affect his education. He graduated fourth in his high school class of 323 students, where he was a member of the National Honor Society, junior class president, and a band major. In 1964, he applied and was accepted to his only college choice, Georgetown University. During his junior year, he served on the staff of his mentor, Arkansas Senator J. William Fulbright. He earned a degree in international affairs from Georgetown in 1968, and the following October set off for Oxford University, where for 2 years he was a Rhodes Scholar. In 1970, he began his first year at Yale University Law School and met Hillary Rodham. After exchanging a series of furtive glances in the library, Rodham approached him and said, "Look, if you're going to keep staring at me, and I'm going to keep staring back, we should at least introduce ourselves." For a moment, Clinton forgot his own name. After Yale, they both taught law at the University of Arkansas. They were married 5 years later on October 11, 1975. A year earlier, Clinton had suffered his first defeat in a race for the House of Representatives from the 3rd District of Arkansas. At his wedding reception, he announced that he would run for political office again. He held to his word and in 1976 was elected Arkansas's Attorney General. In 1978, he became the youngest Arkansas governor elected in 4 decades. He lost a re-election bid in 1980 and reportedly wept. Back on the campaign trail in 1983, he declared that he had, quote, made a young man's mistake. Voters re-elected him for 3 more consecutive terms from 1983 until he ran for president in 1992. His presidential campaign was plagued by rumors of marital infidelity, reported attempts to avoid the Vietnam draft, and a loss in the New Hampshire primary. His ability to sustain such blows led some in the press to nickname him the Comeback Kid. On November 3, 1992, Clinton received the largest number of popular votes of any Democratic candidate in history. He was sworn in to the first of 2 terms, January 20th, 1993. The economy, with low unemployment, inflation, and interest rates, has remained healthy through his administration. Independent counsel Kenneth Starr was named during his first term to investigate accusations that Clinton had unduly profited from a land deal known as Whitewater. During Clinton's second term, Starr also investigated charges that Clinton had encouraged White House intern Monica Lewinsky to lie under oath about their extramarital affair. Clinton later admitted to the affair with Lewinsky and on December 18, 1998, became the second president to be impeached by the House of Representatives since Andrew Johnson in 1868. He was acquitted by the United States Senate in February of 1999.
This administration led America into a new century, turned the economy around, proved that social problems could be solved, and that the country could pull together, that we basically prepared America for a whole new age. and that when we left, the country was much better off than when we came.
Certainly not because of President Clinton. He's been a fascinating subject for me to write about and talk about for many years. And I've always maintained that in terms of foreign policy, his strongest suit is his ability to bring people together toward common ground. It's been his strongest, the idealism in him comes out of that. It stems from his childhood in the South, segregated South, where he was actually a son of the New South who believed in integration, and it was his idealism on race relations that helped draw him into politics in the first place. He's been able to make that transference to foreign policy as well. There are other parts of foreign policy he's not as good at, including follow-through, but in terms of bringing people together, that has always been President Clinton's strongest point.
Georgia Sorensen?
Well, I would agree with David that there are many good qualities about President Clinton. He's done many great things. I'm interested in terms of him as a leadership scholar, and I think the failing that he had in enacting great leadership was really his strategy, not his capability or his capacity or his abilities as a leader. So, and I would also agree with you, David, that it was a big surprise, really, that he would be such a great leader in foreign policy, and I think his ability to mediate and to bring together people with different points of view is a real talent.
If we had the video ready in a moment or two, I'd like to run it showing the different international crises he was involved in. But first, let me take this call from Wichita Falls, Texas. Go ahead, please. I'm sorry, Easton, Pennsylvania. You're on the line. Go ahead, Easton.
Good morning.
Morning.
Mr. Marinus?
Yes.
We like to compare leaders, let's say Churchill with FDR, and I have 3 points of a comparison I'd like to make with Mr. Clinton. I'd like to compare Juan Perón with Mr. Clinton. Number one, we know of the Chinese illegal contributions Clinton received, while in 1950 my father, as the principal executive of American Home Products Corporations, was summoned to the Pink House in Buenos Aires to deliver an amount certain to the private accounts of the Peróns in order to do business in that country. Number two, both men were impeached, and their reputations as womanizers was used to catapult the political careers of Evita Perón and Hillary Clinton, who were their first ladies. And number three, the political strategies of the DNC and the Peronistas were based on class warfare, with great financial support of unions, demagoguing issues such as feminism, racism, and the homeless, while attacking religion, in the case of Argentina, the Catholic Church, and in the United States, the religious right, Protestants and Catholics.
Thank you, caller. David Marinus, you ever heard this one before?
I hadn't. It's a very fascinating analogy, but you know, I don't say much about it beyond that. I mean, there's major differences between Perón and Clinton in terms of the whole democratic process, and Clinton struggling to maintain his power in ways that Perón never had to worry about.
Georgia Sorensen?
Well, I do think charisma obviously plays a big part in both of these leaders, and I think charisma often creates its own kind of environment in a leadership environment, and some of the factors that the caller mentioned would be factors of a charismatic leader.
Now, I've got to ask you the same question again on the air that I asked you this morning. Are you Ted Sorensen's daughter?
No, I'm not.
Have you gotten that before?
Yes, very often. In fact, as many times as I tell my students that I am not Ted Sorensen's daughter, they still believe that I am.
How long have you been doing what you're doing now?
20 years.
And tell us what the program is.
The program is the Academy of Leadership, the James MacGregor Burns Academy of Leadership, which is at the University of Maryland, right outside of D.C., and it encourages and inspires young people to run for public office.
How many students do you have come through the program every year?
Brian, we have about 1,000 students a year who are enrolled, but then we have high school students and other students that show up, people from other countries. We have 72 faculty, including James MacGregor Burns himself, and Ron Walters, and Barbara Kellerman, and Kathy Whitmire, and others. So it's a real lively environment.
Kathy Whitmire, the former mayor of Houston?
That's the one.
Wichita Falls, Texas, on the Liberal Line. Go ahead, please.
Good morning.
I think we could have found some better authors. One of these days, I think we will, especially after Mr. Marinus. I want to ask Mr. Marinus, did you ever mention in your novel the proposition that was brought forth in the Boys Nation that the president brought up to integrate with blacks and finally got it through every Boys Nation? Or is any of this ever put out? All we have are these books on the president. We had Mr. Timberlake on Book Notes yesterday again with another ratty book, and that's what they are. They're right-wing trash.
Have you read
Caller,
my book,
Caller, let me ask you, because you said some negative things about Mr. Marinus. Have you read his book First in His Class?
I have read a portion of it. I have not read it all.
How much of it have you read?
Just portions of it. I've read through it. I have all.
Okay, I'm going to let you go and let Mr. Marinus
Well,
respond.
if she started reading the book, she'd know in the first 10 pages that I talk about Bill Clinton and race relations at Boys Nation. And it's the prologue to the book, ma'am. And how he was one of 3 Southern senators at Boys Nation who supported civil rights. It first came out in my book. The book is full of Bill Clinton and civil rights.
Cedar Rapids, Idaho, you're next. I'm sorry, Cedar Rapids, Iowa, you're next.
You mean Cedar Falls, Iowa?
Yeah, I'll get it right eventually. Go ahead. Cedar Falls, Iowa. Good morning.
Well, thank you. I have a question and a comment. First, the comment is concerning the sex thing. You know, people are opposed to that, and some are in favor of it. I mean, some don't think it's a big deal, but the big deal really is that he lied about it under oath into the jury and that thing, and that's what he was impeached for, not for the sex thing, the lying under oath. But
okay, thanks. Georgia Sorensen, go back to this whole issue, because the calls that are coming in are taking a very hard line on one side or a very hard line on the other side.
Right.
You come, in your book, you say it's dead center. This man is a centrist?
Right. Absolutely.
And give us some of the decisions he's made that makes him a centrist. Sure.
I think the American public, Brian, has been sold the idea that centrism is a kind of moderation. It's where independents go, people that think freely. It's a kind of split the difference, compromise, even the happy middle. It's been called the happy middle. But our contention is it isn't very happy in the middle, because what happens in the middle is a certain kind of, one of your callers mentioned this earlier, the president as mechanic. He is a pragmatist who kind of makes things work, keeps the engine running no matter what's happening. But that's not the kind of leadership that we're most interested in, which is a principled, valued-oriented leadership that some presidents have been able to achieve.
David Marinus, what do you think in history will be, what quotes will we remember about Bill Clinton?
Well, unfortunately, one will be, I did not have sex with that woman, Monica Lewinsky. Other quotes from Bill Clinton, you know, there have been, the interesting thing about President Clinton is that he can be a spellbinding speaker, completely capture an audience in the palm of his hand. But those are usually the speeches that are not written out. And so the written speeches, those moments are few and far between where we'll remember what he said. The era of big government is over. Is that what he wants to be remembered for? That's another one that sticks in one's mind.
Georgia Sorensen, how about you? Will you remember anything he said?
I guess the rights and responsibilities theme that he has dropped right now, but I think it's a pretty important theme that he stuck to for a while.
It was opportunity and responsibility.
You're absolutely right. Right.
San Diego, next.
Morning.
Hi.
I'd like to echo that I don't think David Marinus was the right man for this job, but that's your choice, Brian.
Who would have been right then?
You know, I don't believe at this point you could really find the right person because it's too soon as a historian. But just don't call these people historians that are talking about the present day. That's not what an historian does. You know what I mean?
It's hard to do a program on history when the man's still in office.
I understand that, Brian. But what I'd like to state, I am, by the way, a very proud liberal and an American. I'm a 16th generation American. And I'd like to state this. One thing that I feel that Bill Clinton brought to the table as president was his ability to listen, and I believe that that's the strongest quality of any leader. I don't agree with a lot of his policies, obviously, but I believe that any leader who's willing to sit and listen to both sides and to take what he hears and try to formulate policies to bring those sides together is a great leader. And the leaders that the right admire have never had that ability, particularly Ronald Reagan. He didn't have that ability because he had his mind set on all right-wing issues, and that was it with him. And
Thanks. I want to tell the audience that I was reading an article that Georgia Sorensen had written where you single out Jefferson, Lincoln, FDR, Reagan as some of the stronger presidents. And one of the things you say about Ronald Reagan is that he knew what he wanted and he went for it.
Absolutely. I guess we're one of those liberals that have revisited Ronald Reagan, but he reformed and transformed the Republican Party. He had strong core principles, values. He stuck to them. He lost the first time out in his bid for the presidential nomination and was told by many people that he should move to the center and didn't, and eventually won the presidency and I think made his mark.
And David Maraniss, you write about the listening that President Clinton did in the early years. Want to say anything about that?
Well, he has a remarkable capacity to make anyone who's talking to him feel that they're the only person in the room, that he's listening and understands. And once they make their presentation, he can synthesize it and repeat it back to them and put it into a larger context in a way that's incredibly impressive. And it often works to his great advantage, sometimes to his disadvantage, in that people go in and talk to him and they think not only that he understands what they're saying, but that he agrees with it when he might not.
Gary Johnson, where are you now?
I'm standing in the McClarty room.
Named after?
Named after President Clinton's best friend and also his first White House Chief of Staff, Mac McClarty.
And we have a shot of the railroad tracks outside as Michelle Baylor walks through the little area there between the two buildings. Why did you name a room after Mac McClarty?
Well, not only is it named for Mac, but I guess you could say that more appropriately it's named for his entire family. The McClartys have lived in Hope for many generations. Mac's father, Frank McClarty, was very energetic in the local Chamber of Commerce in bringing industry to our area. And we thought this would be a proper way to honor their family by making our conference room into what we call the McClarty room.
Moorfield, West Virginia on the conservative line. Our next caller, go ahead, please.
Yes, my comment is that people have been calling in about Clinton's private sexual affair, but his impeachment was about a sexual harassment suit that and the cover-up. And also, I hope you have some guests that will present the other side from what they have been presenting.
What other side do you want them to present?
Well, the not so much the positive. I'm sure there were some positive, but also the negative and really serious things that he has done that many people think have harmed the country.
Like what?
Well, the perjury, the cover-up, his dealings with China.
You don't think we've covered that this morning?
Well, maybe I might have missed some. I had to turn it down when I got on the phone.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's go next to Crystal River, Florida. Go ahead, please. You're on the air. Crystal River, Florida, you're on the air.
Hello. I'm calling this morning primarily because I have some real concern about this morning's program. This program is going to have some historical perpetuity to it, but mainly I'm concerned about the students in the high schools across the United States that are going to see this in some of their social studies classes and so forth. And I'm wondering why you have a guest on here who is so anti-Clinton. Even when he tries to say something positive, it kind of dribbles out the side of his mouth to make it look like it's negative. I'm really concerned that it's going to give the wrong impression to a lot of young people in our country who are going to see this in their lessons in our schools.
Thanks for
Thank you.
calling. David Marinus, let me ask Georgia Sorensen. She's kind of a neutral observer here on this morning's program so far. What are you hearing from both sides?
Well, I have to say that when I first read David Marinus's book, I was disappointed because it was such a good book, and I knew I would have to reshape my book in order to accommodate what David had already done. I don't think that it's a liberal book, and I think anybody who hasn't finished it yet should read it, because it's an absolutely wonderful book. It's very hard to write about a president who's living. I think that's exactly right. We won't really know for many years how the public will view Mr. Clinton as a president. But I'd like to say to young people in classrooms, and I try to remember this every single day, Brian, that in the classroom today, on Monday morning, there is the future president, there are all the future Supreme Court justices, there are the CEOs, there are the heads of nonprofits, there's the heads of C-SPANs. They're all sitting in a classroom today. And it's very, very important for us to remember that these are our young people that we want to encourage to have, to take leadership, to have great leadership. And I think these shows are marvelous for that reason.
I don't normally do this, but I want to say to the audience that when we told people that David Marinus was going to be our guest today, both sides said good. For whatever reason, those people who are calling who have not read this book and sounding off and complaining should read the book first before they complain too much, because those people who have read the book on both sides, both Clinton friends and Clinton enemies, said that's the best guest you can have on the program. And we've had Georgia Sorensen join to give us a different view on leadership. So I know David Marinus is wondering at this point, why did I fly all night, get 2.5 hours sleep, come to the studio and sit there to get beaten up by both sides in this process? And that was our choice, not David Marinus's choice.
Right,
Next.
I'm fine with this. I have no problems with that sort of criticism. I understand how people feel about President Clinton. Depending on the question that was asked, I could say positive things about him for 2 hours. It depends on the question. I just try to answer every question honestly.
Next call, Chevy Chase, Maryland, on the moderate line.
Hello?
You're on the air.
Hello. I'm Dr. Michael Schmoker. I'm a 100% Vietnam combat disability retired U.S. Army officer. I'm 53 years old, probably about the same as President Clinton. And it took me a long time to learn that the Vietnam War was wrong. If I wasn't raised in an orphanage, I would, and was more politically aware, I would have opposed that war. I would have been right there with Bill Clinton. And Hillary Clinton has done a fantastic job standing by her husband. I lost my first wife because of my sexual escapades. It takes us a long time to grow up. And it's great that she's a noble woman to stay by her husband. And on the Kosovo War, I was faxing papers to the president all the time. He was so right on that war. He was fantastic.
Thanks, caller. Georgia Sorensen, comment.
Well, first, Colonel, thank you for your service to our country. You sound like a very thoughtful person. I think people have complicated views about Hillary's decision during this time. Young women perhaps differently than older women in the country at large. But I think she made the choice that was right for the country, and I celebrate that.
Gary Johnson, what do you have to show us?
We have a photograph of the very first time that President Clinton met with Boris Yeltsin. This photo was taken in Moscow back in 1994. And as you can see to the president's right, his best friend and chief of staff, Mac McLarty. And to me, the most interesting part of this photo is actually not the photo, but it's the little note that we have framed to the right of the picture. You have to remember, Mac McLarty and the president have been friends virtually their entire lives. And at the top of this little note, it says January the 14th of 94, 8:55 a.m., Moscow, with the president of Russia, Ukraine. Mac, a long way from hope, it says. Thanks, Bill. This was just a little handwritten scribble note that the president wrote to his friend, and indeed they had come a long way from this little town in southwest Arkansas to be meeting face to face with one of the major players in the world arena.
Gary Johnson runs the Visitor Center here in Hope, Arkansas, which you can visit, and also lives in the president's second home in his life at 13th Street here, and you can't miss it when you go by it. There's a big sign in the yard that tells you it was childhood home of Bill Clinton. Buffalo, New York, on the conservative line next. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, Georgia, David Ryan, good morning, Merry Christmas. You know, I was sitting listening to this, and I am not a supporter of Bill Clinton. Mr. Clinton has done quite a little bit for this country, and like you said, Georgia, it's going to take some years before we find out just exactly what's going on. A lot of this stuff is going to be sealed up for 50 years. There are allegations, they're not out. But I tend to believe in the smoking guns and everything that's occurred. And just the other day, you had the ambassador from China at the Maryland University, and I watched that man, and I'm sorry. This gentleman, I tell you, that this gentleman is so full of lies. I could not believe some of the things that he was saying. He did nothing but pat Mr. Clinton on the back and did nothing but tear up our Congress. Now, I believe that our Congress, when everything was laid on them by the special prosecutor, Mr. Starr, they had to investigate and did do what they were supposed to do. Mr. Clinton, that part of it I really don't care about. I care about the dealings with China. I believe we are in trouble. We are in trouble there with the Indonesia bit, with the soft coal, with putting this big monument up, and we are. I don't know where all this is going to lead, but I'm hopeful that somewhere this two-party system that we have in this country, we are going to get someone else elected out of the Democrats or the Republicans, because the Electoral College will not let that happen.
Thanks, Buffalo. Georgia Sorensen.
Well, that's interesting, because I went to the ambassador's speech just a few days at the University of Maryland, and he's a diplomat. He's trying to pave the way for better relations, particularly with the trade issues. You know, it's also interesting in years future, I'm wondering, because Dean Simonton did a study of presidents, and he used 1,000 different variables, you know, everything from, you know, what their religious background, etc. was. And he found that 2 variables were the most important variables in terms of how Americans, not historians or scholars like myself, view presidents. One is if they were assassinated, they were automatically considered great. But the second variable, the second most important variable, was whether they had affairs in office. So I think on some level we like our presidents potent, and he may be seen as a very great president in years future.
This is our last program. It's produced by Maura Pierce, and in Washington, Paul Brown is our producer on location, and Mark Farkas is our executive producer that have taken us through these 41 stops all year long since March 12th, the day that President Clinton visited this house. Long Beach Island, New Jersey. Go ahead, please. You're on the air.
Yes, I really appreciate having the opportunity to say hello and wish you a Merry Christmas and a happy year 2000. I have visited the home of Bill Clinton in Hope, Arkansas, and what I had in-depth conversations with Gary Johnson's mom, who should be lauded. For the last 10 years of their life, they have committed themselves to make Bill Clinton into a wonderful, wonderful president. I just think that they have done so much for his image and his life that I wish Bill would have been a bit honest, more honest. He's got such positives in his life that he could have been one of the greatest presidents with people like Mrs. Johnson and Gary Johnson and Mr. Marinus to put the record straight. And,
thanks, caller. Let me ask Gary Johnson why your parents and you have done this.
Well, my parents have been friends of Bill Clinton's since I believe since his first term in office as governor of our state. And my interest primarily came along from history. And having lived in Hope all of my life, when he was elected president, as you can imagine, this was the biggest event in the history of our community. And you know, we wanted to put as good a face as we could on our community for the world as they come here. So it's I think that's where my family interest lies.
Gary Johnson, where'd you go to college?
I went to a little college about 45 miles from here called Ouachita Baptist University.
And when people come here to the depot, they have a chance to meet you?
I'm here almost every day. I do try to slip away on the weekends and take a little break unless we have something extra special going on.
Another one of the trains coming by. You can hear it in the background as we say, thank you, Gary Johnson, for your hospitality and all that you've done to help Maura Pierce and our crew get situated here in Hope.
It's a pleasure to be here.
And Becky Moore, why do you do what you do, and where are you now, by the way?
I'm standing in the entrance to the Clinton Center, and this is where the visitors come to purchase their ticket. And why I do what I do, because I definitely believe in this man. I was an English major and a history minor, so I'm like Gary. I was a little interested in the history portion of this. And when I took this job, I firmly believed I would go back into school teaching after a given period of time. But I have thoroughly enjoyed it so much. There's some question on what I will do in the future. But it's just been such a joy to meet all of the folks we have coming in here on a daily basis. And I want to show you two interesting things we have placed in the Clinton Center, Brian, if I may do so at this time. We have the U.S. map over here to my right. And the visitors thoroughly enjoy placing a pin on the map where they're from. And you can see we have every state represented. And I will tell you, we opened to the public in June of '97. We did not put the maps in place until October of '97. So we missed a huge summer of tourists. And then to my left, we have the world map. And we not only had every state represented, but we have every continent represented except Antarctica. And that has made this job extremely interesting. And if I may interject something right here to Mr. Marinus, I have read your book many, many times, and I applaud all the information in your book. You have been extremely fair, and the only reason that I'm a little sad today is because I wanted you to autograph my book. But I feel like you've taken a few hits unfairly, and you may feel as the president does on any given day at this time. But I thank you for joining us as well.
Thank you.
Akron, Ohio, on the conservative line, you're next.
Hi. We're now going on 8 years into the Clinton saga, and I don't understand how the lineage of Bill Clinton's father, William Blythe, can be so vague. I mean, for all we know, he's a direct descendant of Captain Bligh. Is Bill Clinton a member of the Skull and Bones like George Bush? And is there any connection between William Bligh and the place called Blytheville in Arkansas where the Scalawags settled? It seems to me time and space is being pirated by the Clinton White House. Thank you.
David Marinus.
There's no relationship between William Jefferson Blythe and Blytheville, Arkansas. And there's none of those other connections that you mentioned as well.
San Diego, California, you're next on the Liver Line.
Yes, I'm calling in regards to the little girl that called this morning. And I think it's a shame to teach the kids to keep hate going in the world like the grown-ups. I know that politics create a lot of hate and discontent, but we could change the world if we teach our kids to love instead of hate. Now, that was a very hateful thing for the parents to do, to have their kid to call in with such nonsense this morning.
Thanks. Georgia Sorensen, when you study presidents and leadership, how do you do it?
How do I do it? Well, I have a lot of wonderful historians around me, so that's one way. And the other way is to go and meet and talk with them and talk to people who've worked with them.
What have you learned from James McGregor Burns?
Oh, James McGregor Burns. He's wonderful. I learned to be a writer. He's also a person who has very deep values in which he lives by. He's a wonderful role model because his personal life and his private life and his public life and his writings are very aligned, and that's very wonderful.
But when you apply leadership to Bill Clinton, what is it you would have liked for him to have done that would have gotten him a high mark?
Right. I think that he had enormous possibilities. I do think he's a diamond, but like diamonds, we're ground by our own dust. And he unfortunately fell victim to some of that. I think that if he had taken principled stands, core values that he really believed in, and stuck by them, win or lose, live or die, he would have been a better leader. He does have strong core values. For example, the issue on race, as someone mentioned earlier. He feels very passionately about that. But even in areas of race, he was lukewarm and kind of split the difference.
David Marinus in Washington, Georgia Sorensen here in Hope, Arkansas. Next call, Annapolis, Maryland, on the moderate line.
Yeah, I feel like I'm a moderate. I'm a former Democrat, former military, and until lately I was a Democrat, but I switched parties because of Bill Clinton and his lack of integrity. I disagree with Georgia. I don't believe that he has core values that he's willing to stick with. I read David Marinus' book several times. I'm going to buy yours, Georgia, but the thing that came across was the fact that I thought he was a chameleon. And there's two things that really bother me. I think he's a divisive president on everything from race to gun control, and I think that he's hurt women's lib more than helped it. I think the man talks a good talk about women's lib, but when the rubber meets the road, he treats them like toilet paper. And foreign policy matters. I'm really worried about China and the rest of the world and everything from the Panama Canal to, selling trade secrets for DNC donations. And I wonder if he's a mole, because I really am worried about China.
Okay, thanks. Let me show you some videotape of Bill Clinton during the different crises that he faced when he sent troops overseas, and we'll get David Marinus and Georgia Sorensen to analyze that part of his presidency.
Earlier today, I ordered Secretary of Defense Perry to call up the military reserve personnel necessary to support United States troops in any action we might undertake in Haiti. I have also ordered 2 aircraft carriers, the USS Eisenhower and the USS America, into the region.
Earlier today, the United States carried out simultaneous strikes against terrorist facilities and infrastructure in Afghanistan. Our forces targeted one of the most active terrorist bases in the world. Earlier today, I ordered America's armed forces to strike military and security targets in Iraq. They are joined by British forces. Their mission is to attack Iraq's nuclear, chemical, and biological weapons programs and its military capacity to threaten its neighbors. Today, our armed forces joined our NATO allies in airstrikes against Serbian forces responsible for the brutality in Kosovo. We have acted with resolve.
That's a few of the times that he sent troops in. Thanks to Jill Leger, who put that clip together for us. What's your reaction, Georgia Sorensen?
Well, I have to say my personal views on this come into play. I'm a Quaker and a Buddhist and opposed to any kind of military action, so I would be opposed to his actions in that regard. I feel very strongly about his capacities as a diplomat and peacemaker.
And David Marinus.
Well, I think you'd have to separate out those 4 examples. I think in the case of Haiti, almost in every example, his critics said that it would be a failure, and it didn't turn out to be that way. Particularly true in Haiti, where he did accomplish exactly what he hoped to do, and in Kosovo. The other 2, there are questions about why he did it and whether it was more political than strategic. But I think that, so you'd have to take each example individually.
Dixon, Illinois, on the conservative line next. Go ahead, please.
Hi, I'd like to comment your show. Learned a lot watching it, and I'd like to make one comment towards Bill Clinton.
Can I ask you a question before you do that?
Yes.
What impact has it had on Dixon, Illinois, that President Reagan's childhood home is located there?
It's made a big impact. I think a lot of Dixon, Illinois doesn't agree with Clinton's policies, and it's just Ronald Reagan, I think a lot of people from Dixon think Ronald Reagan was a real good president and are going towards Reagan's way and against what Clinton had to do with anything.
All right, what's your comment on Bill Clinton?
I think he's just a liar. I'm 20 years old, and it doesn't take a genius to find out that Clinton's he's phony. You look at him when he talks, and all he has to do is lie.
Thanks for the call. We go to Worthington, West Virginia, on the Liberal line. Good morning.
Good morning. I'd like to comment on his working on world peace in the Middle East and on Ireland and other places, and how he's used force where necessary, and and peace talks with the others. I haven't heard much people talk about the work he's done worldwide, and I thought he'd done them quite a big will.
Georgia Sorensen, what about that part of his presidency?
Well, I've worked with Irish political leaders, all of the different parties, for about 4 years now. And through George Mitchell and also through the president's intervention, bringing Jerry Adams to the White House, for example, and other ways, I think he's made a tremendous impact and tremendous contribution to the peace agreement in Northern Ireland.
Mr. Marinas, you want to add something?
I think that the gentleman is right, that there isn't just the war-making component to President Clinton. He has a very strong peacemaking side. And the question is, could he have used it more in some of those other instances?
Bowie, Maryland, you're next.
Hello, my name is Sharice. I'm from Bowie, Maryland. It's good to be on your show. First of all, I need to applaud David Marinas. I think that he has the absolute kind of dispassionate detachment that is critical to be able to be fair in historic judgment. So I'm glad to be able to talk to you this morning. I'd like to say to Ms. Sorensen, however, though, you indicated that Ronald Reagan was such a strong leader because of his ability to change the party. Don't you agree also that Bill Clinton was as effective in changing the direction of the Democratic Party from such a far left drift into a more moderate centered approach to policy development? The second thing also that I'd like to say to Ms. Sorensen is you said that with some distance now from Ronald Reagan, you've been able to look at him differently. And all of the leading presidents that you identified as so strong leaders really recognize that they were clear for their times. I think that in time we will see that President Clinton was appropriate for the time that he was in fact the president, because Ronald Reagan helped us to get on the world scene and to get rid of communism. However, we needed to look inward and focus on our domestic strength, which I think is going to be a great platform for the 21st century.
Thanks, Bowie. Georgia Sorensen.
Well, I agree with you. I think that looking back, we'll see that President Clinton was a party transformer as well. I think that he has moved the Democratic Party to the center. I don't think that in history's view that will be a positive thing, but I think that you can make the case that he did move the party to the center. I guess another question I'd like to address is this notion about the president lying, for example, and his affair with Monica Lewinsky. I might have my own personal feelings about that, but as a leadership scholar, Brian, I have to say that I've become very, very concerned about the lack of privacy that our president has. And I think that in order to be a thoughtful, reflective, value-oriented leader, you have to have a zone of privacy which is not accessible to the public through the media. And and I think in some cases you can lie about that in order to protect your privacy.
By the way, if you've just joined us, we haven't been promoting our number on our C-SPAN in the classroom today because we're at the end of our series. But for teachers who have been watching and want to join us as we go through the year 2000, where we'll be covering the campaign, the number to call is 202-626-4858, or you can go through our website, which is probably the most efficient way to do it, cspan.org/classroom. And folks are there to take your calls, but the internet will allow you to sign up, and it'll help move the process move along faster. Tifton, Georgia, on the conservative line. Good morning.
Good morning, Brian. How you doing this morning?
Doing good, sir. Welcome.
I wanted to wish you Merry Christmas and a Happy 2000. I think y'all doing a real good job up there, Brian.
Thank you, sir.
And I was watching the videos of Hope, Arkansas. It kind of reminds me of Plains. Where I'm living at, we about 70 miles south of Plains, Georgia. And I'd like to ask Miss Sorensen there if she's with the Clinton and Gore campaign there. Do you think that the upcoming election would be kind of against Al Gore being the scandal come out on the president?
Well, thank you for your call. I did work for Jimmy Carter and was privileged to go to Plains many times, and Hope does remind me of Plains. There's a wonderful quality about this town. It's a very small, real town. I didn't work for the Clinton-Gore campaign. I should make that clear. I knew that I was going to write the book and wanted to be very neutral. I was tempted to get involved in that presidential race, but I did not.
David Marinas, are you going to write any more about Bill Clinton in another book?
Well, not in the near future. I might, I think 10 years from now, go back and look at his life again in a broader context. But I'm moving on to other subjects.
Can you quantify the number of hours or weeks or months that you spent in researching Bill Clinton before you wrote the book?
I spent all of 1992 traveling with him and going to the places of his life to write larger stories for the Washington Post. Then in 1993, I spent much of that time in Arkansas and in Texas and at Yale and Georgetown and Oxford, retracing the steps of his life. And so 92, 93, 94, and 95, I worked on Bill Clinton, and then came back to him again as I was doing the Lombardi book when the Lewinsky story broke, and spent more time trying to explain him then.
Nashville, Tennessee on the Liberal line. Go ahead, please.
Good morning, Brian. Merry Christmas and Happy New Year to you and to all of your guests. Haven't been able to get through all year, so this is a delight, and I have a question for both of these guests. So don't cut me off after the first question, please. To you, Miss Sorensen, I saw you and Mr. McGregor Burns on Book Notes a few weeks ago, and really appreciated what you had to say about leadership, and would give anything to have your role working with the great man. But I was screaming at my television when I was listening to you speak, because one of the things that you talked about in the leadership area of failure was in the role of the large health care implementation. What you seem to ignore altogether was the $300 million or more spent in defeating the health care plan, the overwhelming money that was thrown at defeating President Clinton and Mrs. Clinton on health care. I think that really needs to be looked at very seriously, and how that really hurt any chance of health care ever being adopted. And
Caller, hold on. Let Georgia Sorensen respond, because we got a lot of people waiting to get on. Go ahead, Georgia.
I agree that we didn't look at the area of big money. However, I wouldn't consider that a leadership failure. I think great leaders have issues and ideas that they're committed to, and they don't go down in defeat. They don't pack up their bags and go home. They keep on working on it, like Wilson did with the League of Nations, ultimately became the United Nations several administrations later. So I don't consider that a leadership act. I hope that that they will continue pushing forward. The women's suffragist movement took 100 years. Things aren't easy. This is a hard thing.
Follow-up question for David Marinus. Nashville, are you still there?
I am.
Your follow-up question for David Marinus.
To Mr. Marinus, I have to say that the psychology of the Washington press corps needs to be looked at too. The overwhelming hatred of President Clinton by 99.9% of the Washington press corps, and how they have treated him over the last 7 years, needs to be looked at. But Mr. Marinus, Hillary Clinton 2 years ago talked about the right-wing cabal that was going after President Clinton, and how that would be discovered. A good friend of mine, Gene Lyons, and Joe Conason have written a book that is coming out next month that really has discovered the conspiracy behind the Monica Lewinsky, Linda Tripp issue. And I think you would be wise to read that book, because there is a conspiracy that went deep into Ken Starr's office and Paula Jones' lawsuit. And I think that the press corps really has a lot to answer for.
Thanks, Nashville. David Marinus?
Well, I certainly will read that book. That I think that there are connections between the Paula Jones people and Ken Starr's office, and on the right wing in terms of ways to get President Clinton, and that he has played into their hands. I think they're both true.
Olympia, Washington on the conservative line.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm really enjoying this series. I'm almost sorry to see it end, but I realize that one of the last president is Mr. Marinus. Do I understand you're the author of When Pride Still Mattered?
I am.
I'm really looking forward to reading that.
Thank you.
I wanted to make one quick comment and a couple of questions. My comment was, at the time of the impeachment trial, I really wish that Clinton had stepped down to avoid the long, drawn-out impeachment trial in the Senate. But my question is, in the impeachment trial, there was a presentation by, I believe his name was Gompers, recent retired senator.
Senator Bumpers.
Bumpers.
I was wondering if I could hear more about the rivalry between him and Clinton, and also was Vernon Jordan once chairman of the Democratic National Committee?
No.
Thanks, caller.
Vernon Jordan was not once chairman of the Democratic National Committee, and Dale Bumpers was a governor of Arkansas during the period when Bill Clinton was first getting into politics. He was a very articulate speaker, a sort of folksy liberal. He went to the Senate when Clinton was governor. David Pryor, another former governor and moderate Democrat, was also in the Senate. And there was Bill Clinton as governor who really wanted to go to Washington, and there were two other older, very respected Democrats already there. So there were occasions of friction between Dale Bumpers and Bill Clinton just because of that natural rivalry in a small state, although they agreed on most issues. They do have some very different personalities. Bumpers was not always that enamored with Bill Clinton, but when push came to shove, when Clinton needed a great defender, there was Dale Bumpers to do it for him.
Becky Moore is in the Clinton Center, which is right behind the house here. By the way, Becky Moore, the house that you're in belonged to whom before you bought it?
Yes, it was originally built by a man named Mr. Lewis, and it was built in 1907, and the home you're in, Brian, was built in 1917, so it was a definite plus when we purchased this structure. We were able to take some things from this home to enhance the home where you are at this time.
I don't know if you're near it, but I know you have a rug in there that looks an awful lot like the rug in the Oval Office.
Yes, we have a replica of the Oval Office rug, and I was going to tell you about that. It's the focal point of the second room in the Clinton Center, and if you want to pan down and look at the seal on the rug, the rug was designed by Khaki Hawker-Smith from Little Rock, Arkansas. She also designed the rug in President Clinton's Oval Office. And so many people are surprised by the fact that every president has their own Oval Office rug. And he chose these vibrant colors because he wanted a very patriotic-looking office. And so this is an important piece for us in this house. Now, when his library has been completed in Little Rock, Arkansas, his rug will then go into the library, but we will always have the replica here with us.
Can I ask you, did you have that done specifically for your house there?
Yes, we did. And it was completed shortly after we opened the Clinton Center. And so many people, some of the callers may be interested, so many people ask us how much it cost. I've heard anything from $35,000 to $50,000, but we always let them know that we didn't have to pay for it. Their money did not help pay for this. We did have a rug signing party, and the donors who gave $100 or more to the rug, they were able to sign the underside of the rug. So we have a lot of names underneath the rug, and it's also special, and people want to see that when they come in here.
Nearing the end of our program, we go next to DeLand, Florida on the Liberal Line. Good morning.
Good morning. My question is about the evaluation of presidential qualities. We know that the presidents are always evaluated with respect to how they hew to values and so forth. Think about Jefferson relative to slavery and how the Sally Hemings issue has affected the evaluation of Jefferson. I think it's impossible to say how, quote, good or bad a president is. Feelings and values fade or enlarge over time. I think I'm going to ask the question as to whether can we ever reach a consensus about Clinton, and must we? I think that looking at Jefferson's example, we've learned a lot about reevaluating Jefferson's attitude towards slavery over time. We might do the same thing for Clinton as time passes on.
Georgia Sorensen?
Well, I think that's right, although the great presidents have remained relatively stable, at least in the historians' list. But, you know, I think we have to remember that these are just mortal people, you know, everyday people that get up in the morning and brush their teeth and work hard and try to get the job done. And it's an amazing thing when you recognize that they are just like us.
We're in Hope, Arkansas, a town of about 10,000 people, depending on who you talk to. Some say 9,700, others say 9,800. Then I guess there's a local dispute over that. Marietta, Georgia, on the conservative line. Go ahead, please.
Hi, Brian. I appreciate your program on the American presidents. It's very informative. I'm sure future students will get a lot of use out of these programs. My call, I guess, would be for both of your guests today regarding Clinton's foreign policy. I know you just showed the clips of the different times that Clinton had used force in foreign policy matters. I'd like to hear each of their opinions regarding the bombing of Iraq in 1998, which began the day impeachment was to begin and ended the day after. And I wondered if they thought that that was merely coincidence and why nothing else was made. The media never commented really on the timing of that bombing. I was wondering what their opinion was.
Mr. Marinas.
Well, it goes to the wag the dog theory, as it's called. My own feelings about that are that in terms of Iraq, it's coincidental. It might have helped Clinton, but he would have done it anyway. In terms of another of those bombings, the so-called pharmaceutical company in Sudan during another touchy period in terms of his impeachment. I think there are larger questions about that on all levels, why he did it, what really was there, and what the politics of it were.
Georgia Sorensen?
I would agree with David. I don't think that he bombed Iran or Iraq to up his ratings.
Becky Moore, the presidential library is going to be built in Little Rock. Was there ever a consideration that it be built here in Hope, Arkansas?
Well, this all took place when I was teaching school, Brian, but I believe they did consider Hope and they considered Hot Springs. But being the state capital and a fabulous location, I'm really thankful it is going to be where it is.
Now, in your study of Bill Clinton, have you gone to Hot Springs to look at his home there on Scully Street and the one on Park Road?
Believe it or not, I have not. I was in Hot Springs at one time, not for that purpose, and accidentally ran into the president. It was when I was still teaching school, and we did have a brief visit there. He had come home for a class reunion, but I have not taken the time to go and visit. I'm pretty busy here.
There's the home on Park, as you just saw, and there's the home on Scully Street, both located in Hot Springs, Arkansas, which is about 80 miles. Is it 80 miles from here, Becky Moore?
Yes.
80 miles.
Roughly.
Yeah. And Mr. Marinas, that was the high school. Have you spent time in Hot Springs much?
Oh, quite a bit, yeah. I used to stay at the Arlington Hotel when I was down there, and I've been to both of those houses, went inside them and write about them in the book. And Hot Springs is it's not that far up the highway from Hope, but it's a far different place.
Laurel, Maryland on the moderate line, good morning. Laurel, Maryland, are you there?
Questions for your panelists. I'm curious about what they think the one or two ambitions the president might have left in the last year of his office. And secondly, I think the success of a president depends perhaps on the view he has of himself and how comfortable he is in the job. And if you could look at President Reagan and President Clinton and sort of contrast the two, is it fair to say that Reagan was perhaps run down and that Clinton has been run down but is still alive and kicking? And because I see Reagan as sort of tired and at times sleepy in his job, and I see Clinton as vigorous, and maybe it's an age factor. What do your columnists say there?
Georgia Sorensen.
Well, I do think that President Clinton is very vigorous, and I think he will work very hard. I think that historians would agree that there's not much you can do in the last year of your presidency. But I think after his presidency, I expect that he will be quite active in the area of race relations, for example. He's a man who works very, very hard, and he's not going to stop the day he leaves office.
Mr. Marinas, what do you think his core beliefs are?
I think that the center of Clinton's core beliefs are that that public education is a good thing, that government is there to try to better the lives of the average person, and that mostly that America is built on diversity, and that he wants people of different backgrounds and races to work together in the democracy. I think that's the essence of his beliefs. I think that everything else around that is built on politics.
Newburgh, Indiana, on the Liberal line. Go ahead, please. You're next.
Well, it's another comment about this lying situation. I always tickled about these people that call in and bring that up, and I wonder if they've ever lied about anything in their personal life and whether they think any other politician lies besides Clinton. But they also neglect to mention that he was definitely set up by the Linda Tripp deal the night before he was to give the deposition in the Paula Jones case. And, you know, I really am not sure he ever did lie. He skirted the truth, but I'm sure he did just what any politician would have done under the circumstances of it being a worldwide event that would be made known, and his family was going to hear about it that way. So several of the right wingers did lie at the same time. So it's so amusing that they're so caught up with this, but they don't want to admit that it really was a deal. And I'm glad that the Conason book and Jane Lyons book is coming out. Thank you.
Thanks, Newburgh, Indiana. David Marinus, did this president lie? And if he did, what do you say about it?
Well, I think that he was put in a situation where he was trying to not answer the questions truthfully. And it's right at that line throughout that Jones deposition. Clearly he did not, I mean, he lied to the American public. There's no doubt about that with his finger-wagging episode. And I think, you know, a lot of people took more offense to that lie than to the lies over the sex itself when he was in the Jones deposition.
Let's run that clip one more time, because you did refer to it earlier when you talked about things that people will remember. Here is Bill Clinton on that denial.
Now, I have to go back to work on my State of the Union speech, and I worked on it till pretty late last night. But I want to say one thing to the American people. I want you to listen to me. I'm going to say this again. I did not have sexual relations with that woman, Miss Lewinsky. I never told anybody to lie, not a single time, never. These allegations are false, and I need to go back to work for the American people. Thank you.
Georgia Sorensen, you remember that?
Oh, I sure do. Once again, I believe that even presidents deserve a zone of privacy, and in fact can lie about that zone of privacy if it's invaded. Writing the book took 6 years for Jim and I literally knew what Bill Clinton did every single minute of his life in July and August of 1969. And I think that's just reprehensible. I think that I don't want to write another book in which I'm examining a person's life minute by minute. I think that they deserve a zone of privacy.
I don't know if you've noticed, but 2 hours and 45 minutes into this program, Hillary Rodham Clinton's name I don't think has been mentioned, but we're going to show you a little bit of her in a moment. But Oak Harbor, Washington, on the conservative line, you're next.
Yes, good morning. I've got a couple of questions, one for each of your panelists, but I'd like to say, since you just played that clip, that the president was, if you abide by the letter of the law, not actually, he didn't perjure himself. He did say that he was referring to his definition of sexual relations that he gave in the Paula Jones deposition, which didn't include, you know, certain acts which were called into question. So if by the letter of his statement, I don't think he did perjure himself, if you go down to semantics. But my questions were, for Ms. Sorensen, what kind of parallels could you draw between the Kennedy administration and the Clintons? And also, for Mr. Moranis, what was President Clinton's time at Rhodes like? Thank you very much.
Well, one thing I would say is that in terms of the issue of lying, I think that he did have a different definition of sexual relations than other people. A lot of men do, frankly. I think that we as an American nation used the Clintons to work out some issues that we have about marriage and fidelity and other things. I think that they were our puppets. More than half of the American people have been unfaithful to their spouse. So this is an issue that we're working on, and we have not found ways to really address the issue in our marriages or as a nation. So I think they got used by us.
David Marinus, Rhodes Scholarship at Oxford.
President Clinton, Bill Clinton won his Rhodes Scholarship in 1968, went over that fall, spent 2 years at Oxford. He did not get a degree from Oxford. It would have been a 3-year program that he was working on. During much of that period, he was troubled by what to do over the draft. The first year in particular, before the lottery came along, and he got exempted from the draft because of his high lottery number. He'd spent a lot of time traveling, taking what they call the Grand Tour, which is really, according to Sir Edgar Williams, who ran the Rhodes program at Oxford, really what it was all about. Even more than getting that degree from Oxford, it's a chance for these Americans to see the continent and to experience life in a way that they can in the United States. He went all over Europe and to Russia during that period. He made a lot of friends who he carried with him for the rest of his career, bringing several of them into the White House with him, including Bob Reich, who became his labor secretary, and Strobe Talbot, who became the Deputy Secretary of State.
And in that picture we showed, Strobe Talbot was on his left, and Frank Aller, who you report, I think, in your book, was the only one of 32 who are not alive?
Frank Aller was a draft resistor, very committed against the war, and he committed suicide, killed himself when Bill Clinton was at Yale Law School, sort of adrift and lost about where the country was going and his own troubles dealing with the draft.
Elizabethton, Tennessee, on the Liberal line, you're next.
Yes, thank you very much. My name's Tom Birchfield. I'm a registered voter and a veteran. I voted for Bill Clinton twice, and I think he's the greatest president since JFK. 95% of the American people, if they were caught in the same situation that he was over an affair, he would have denied it. Now, that's the truth. It's beyond words that the hypocrites, mainly the Republicans, point their finger and run the other way. Well, my comment's simply this. Where's Newt Gingrich, and where is the other House Speaker that stepped down and is now a lobbyist there in the White House? Thank you very much.
Thank you. And here's some video, as we see on the screen there. The home on the right there, the little White House, is on Hervey Street here in Hope, Arkansas, where Bill Clinton lived in his very early years for the first 5 years or so. We go to a little video of Hillary Rodham Clinton.
I want to do whatever I can to support my husband, both personally and through his efforts. Therefore, I will do whatever he asks me to do to try to be helpful. I also want to make sure that my family is protected, particularly my daughter, but my extended family as well, from the inevitable reflection of glare and scrutiny that comes to those who are related to someone in this position. And I want to continue to be active on behalf of causes and issues that I've worked on for more than 25 years and that I feel very deeply about. I care about politics. I mean, that may not be a wise thing for a person married to a president to say, but it would be untrue if I were not to say that. I care about politics. I care about the state of life in this country. I care about our government. I care about the public policy issues that come through the door of the White House because they require the president and the administration and the country to pay attention. I've always cared about it. Ever since I was a little girl, I will care about it long after my husband is out of the White House. So I'm not about to start caring about things that I've never cared about because it's not appropriate in somebody else's mind for me to continue to care about what I've always cared about.
Becky Moore, who is over in the center, right across from where we are. What do people here think of Hillary Rodham Clinton, who is not a native of this town?
Well, Brian, actually, you might be surprised to know that we really hear very little comments about the First Lady. During the time the scandal first broke, we went back and forth on what she should have done and what she actually did. But it was just about 1 month of conversation about the First Lady, and since that time, we hear nothing else.
St. Helen, Oregon, on the conservative line. You're next.
Oh, yes. I'm calling because I'm interested in all this talk about, you know, he lied about this, but that's okay. We have to hold these people to the truth. The truth is really important. Otherwise, we get this cynicism that says, well, they all lie. If we can't hold them to the truth, then we might as well, you know, well, not pack it up, but just go ahead and elect the best person that sounds the best.
All right, St. Helen, thank you. Let's go next to Sparks, Nevada. Go ahead, please. You're on the air.
Yeah, good morning. And first of all, let me say happy holidays to you, Brian.
Thank you.
My question involves, of course, as we're giving accolades to Mr. Clinton for his foreign policy, I'd like to know if either one of your reporters have any idea what it costs each individual taxpayer for us to go into Golan Heights, buy property from Israel, turn around and give this property to the Palestinians as part of the Wye River Accord. And then on the other hand, just exactly how much are we into this little charade that Mr. Clinton pulled in Kosovo? And has anybody ever heard of we are not our brother's keeper, and we cannot take Kosovo and turn it over to Albania because Madeleine Albright, that was her desire? And the last caller that called before this hit the nail on the head. We do need some accountability.
Thanks. David Marinas.
I don't know what it costs to buy the property in Golan Heights, but I do know that the amount of money that the United States spends on foreign aid and in foreign policy is minimal compared to the importance of it in terms of our relations with the world.
Georgia Sorensen?
I think it's less than 1% of the budget, the foreign aid budget. So that would support David's point of view.
Fort Smith, Arkansas, on the Liberal line.
Yes, since this program is going out to students and it will be kept in some sort of archives, I have a couple of comments. One for Mr. Marinas, and then actually another one from a historical standpoint. Mr. Marinas stated that when he's asked something positive, he tries to state something positive, and yet when he was asked for a quote from Mr. Clinton, and he has done extensive research, I assume, he gave the quote of, I didn't have sex with that woman. Now, from the student standpoint, the students that are watching this, I would suggest that you go back in time to the McCarthy era and Joe McCarthy and see what extreme right-wing tactics were used against all kinds of people during that time, and know that Mr. Clinton has been hounded from the very first day that he got into office, and it's amazing that he's on his feet. He'll be okay. He'll do all right. He'll be on his feet and going when you all have had your 15 minutes of fame.
Thank you. Mr. Marinas?
I'm very well aware of Joe McCarthy and what he did to people, and so I take that very personally. And as much as I know Clinton has suffered, it doesn't compare to what people did during that era.
McLean, Virginia, on the conservative line. Go ahead, please.
Hi. Yeah, I have a question because I don't understand very much about perhaps of Clinton's use of the military. But what I'm worried about is when Clinton has gone into military conflicts. See, these are things that have gone on for generations. I'm thinking specifically of the Middle East and of Serbia and that sort of thing. The conflict in Serbia is actually, it's related to what started World War I. Now, Clinton's idea of warfare, it seems to me, is that he goes in and we air bomb people. But that never seems to solve the problem. I mean, these conflicts are things that have gone on for generations, and the only sort of solution it seems to be a long-term solution because it's a long-term problem. I.e., what we don't want to hurt civilians. Well, what's
Thanks, caller. We're going to let you go because we're out of time, and that'll be our last call. I want to get people here a chance to sum it up. Georgia Sorensen.
Well, I guess I would hope that the Clinton legacy has shown us that there are human beings in the White House, that the President and the First Lady are human beings just like you and I. All presidents lie, they make mistakes, they get up and they dust themselves off and they keep on going. And I would hope that young people everywhere would understand from the series and also from the Clinton presidency that they too can make a contribution. They too can be President, Chief Justice, CEO, President of C-SPAN, whatever it takes, because these positions are just held by ordinary people who are very committed and very passionate about change.
Thanks for coming down here.
Thank you.
David Marinas turned around last night and went back home, and you had to come all the way down here. Mr. Marinas, he's barely smiling this morning.
No, I'm fine.
What was your last comment like to be about President Clinton or the presidency?
I'd like to take it back to hope, actually. When Bill Clinton was 5 years old there was another kid in town, Mac McLarty, who everyone thought would probably be governor someday, not Bill Clinton, and maybe move beyond that. Mac McLarty was the son of the big shot in town. Nobody really knew Bill Clinton's family, except for his dad running a grocery store. And yet it was Bill Clinton's intelligence and perseverance and skills that brought him all the way to the White House. And Mac McLarty really didn't family, except for his dad running a grocery store. And yet it was Bill Clinton's intelligence and perseverance and skills that brought him all the way to the White House. And Mac McLarty really didn't become, governor, or, he followed Bill Clinton into the White House. He didn't get there himself.
In a moment, we'll take you live to Hope, Arkansas. But first, a look at some background information on the nation's 42nd president.
He was a member of Boys Nation when, in July of 1963, he visited the White House and President Kennedy. The trip solidified an already burgeoning interest in politics. Classmates would later remember that children would gather around Bill Clinton. A teacher once predicted that his mouth was either going to get him into the governor's mansion or into trouble. A high school contemporary recalled that Clinton was always running for something, and his law school friends were impressed by his good grades, despite an impression that he didn't study. He was born in Hope, Arkansas on August 19, 1946, and named William Jefferson Blythe III, after his father, who died in a car accident shortly before his birth. His mother, Virginia, studied nursing in New Orleans from 1947 until 1950. Billy, as he was called, stayed behind in Hope with his grandparents, Edith and Eldridge Cassidy. He became acquainted with his first stepfather at his grandfather's grocery store in Hope. Roger Clinton owned a Buick dealership in town and visited the store often, occasionally to supply Billy's grandfather, Pawpaw, with bootleg whiskey. Roger Clinton's nickname was Dude because he was thought of as handsome, engaging, and well-dressed. When Virginia returned to Hope from school, they married. 2 years later, in 1953, the three relocated to Hot Springs, Arkansas. Although his stepfather never adopted him, Billy Blythe began to call himself Billy Clinton by the first grade. Life at home became increasingly more difficult as he became aware of his stepfather's alcoholism, and he often felt responsible for defending his mother against his stepfather's verbal and physical attacks. Despite conflicts with his stepfather, he legally changed his surname at the age of 16 as a sign of solidarity for his half-brother, Roger. The turmoil of his home life did not affect his education. He graduated fourth in his high school class of 323 students, where he was a member of the National Honor Society, junior class president, and a band major. In 1964, he applied and was accepted to his only college choice, Georgetown University. During his junior year, he served on the staff of his mentor, Arkansas Senator J. William Fulbright. He earned a degree in international affairs from Georgetown in 1968, and the following October set off for Oxford University, where for 2 years he was a Rhodes Scholar. In 1970, he began his first year at Yale University Law School and met Hillary Rodham. After exchanging a series of furtive glances in the library, Rodham approached him and said, "Look, if you're going to keep staring at me, and I'm going to keep staring back, we should at least introduce ourselves." For a moment, Clinton forgot his own name. After Yale, they both taught law at the University of Arkansas.